Okay, so I'm super excited because we are back with Connected Conversations, which I was looking at the thing. I think the last one we did was October, right? Halloween. Yeah, Halloween. So the super cool thing about this one, though, is that the very first Connected Conversation I did, Tyrell was my guest. And when I wanted to do them, I wanted to do them because I wanted to bring him here to speak. So that was really awesome. Actually, you guys might not even know the story. I could tell you the story of, do you want me to tell you the story? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I really wanted him to be the guest for Connected Conversations. So I think I messaged you. And I said, hey, you want to go for coffee? And he was like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. I was like, cool. Because I'd heard him speak actually. Now it's been probably a long time. Whenever you did Jonathan's thing, which was, yeah, like a long time ago. But when I heard him do that event, he's amazing. Like, you guys will all know this tonight. Like, he is so absolutely incredible. He was talking about social media, I think. But just, I don't even really have the words to describe him, which is why you're all here, because you'll actually get to experience him. And I know you'll feel the same way that I do. So when I did this, I really wanted him to be a guest. So anyway, so he said yes to coffee, and I'm driving down there, and I'm like, okay, Jordy, like seriously, pull your stuff together, please. I know, please be cool. Don't be like all crazy and weird and stuff, and just be normal for once. So I'm like, okay. So we got our coffee, and I'm waiting. I'm like, okay. I really want to ask you something, and I really want you to say yes, because I love you so much. And he's going like 8 shades of red. And I'm like, I want to do this event, and I really want you to speak at it. He's like, yeah, sure. I was like, oh my God, thank you. So cool went out the window, but he said yes, and yeah, I know. But it was so awesome. Like, yeah, you'll see. Like, I don't even have the words to describe how awesome I think you are. And it's you know, and because you're young, and he was young like when I met him, right? And I was like, wow, he's really got his stuff together. Like, he's so clear with who he is, what he stands for, what's really important. And there's not a lot of wavering, I don't think, for you. Like, I think you're pretty solid in. He is such a role model, and like I was telling you today, and I was telling my son today, I wish I had a bigger platform. Like, I wish I was like Ellen or Oprah or somebody super huge, because I think, like, if I had a magic wand, everybody in the world would hear his message, because I just think he's that awesome. So don't worry, he'll be. No, you know what? No, you'll be. I already know that. There's not a single cell in my body that doesn't think he isn't all of that, so he'll be fine. Right? For those of you that heard him the first time, you get it. And so I'm really glad that you're here. I'm really glad that we can all support what he's up to, because it's more than just going to the Olympics, right? It's more than just, winning a medal and doing all those things. I think it's going to give him a platform to do really amazing stuff. And it also, he's one of those people that walks his talk, so it gives him a chance to really, do all those things that are hard and share that stuff, but actually to do it. Which is for a Patreon page. So if you want to continue to support Tyrell after this, you can. And I had to push him a little bit, actually a lot, to set this up, but I think it's really worth it, and I think after you hear him, you'll agree with me. And so how this night's going to work, for those of you who haven't been here, because there's a lot of people who haven't experienced one of these nights. So Tyrell's going to start with sharing some awesome stuff about what your crazy stuff is, and then when we're done with that, we will actually have a conversation, and all of you get to be part of the conversation. So it's open to anything. You can ask questions, you can share. There is nothing's off the table. So whether it's Olympics, work, personal, whatever it is, it's open. So if I forgot anything, I'll think about it later. But yeah, if not, yay! Go to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's been long enough that I forgot what that experience was exactly like when you introduced me the first time. Very, very flattering, humbling, and yeah.
I told you I should be your personal introducer.
Yeah, it'll take me a few minutes to like get my faces, the colors in my faces back down. So I just want to start by saying thank you to all of you that came here, and anyone who's tuning in online or watches this later. Some of you I know, which is amazing, from either Facebook or even previous events, and I think that's incredible, but a lot of you I don't know, and the fact that you're here and are supporting me, supporting Georgie, supporting this community. I was chatting earlier that when I came and did the first one, I didn't know what to expect. But I was excited. I get so excited to do this, and I'm really excited tonight because I haven't been able to share my story or have this type of conversation in about 8 weeks, just because life has been crazy, and that happens, and national championships and having a baby and all those types of things, which I'll go into later. But I remember the depth of the conversations and kind of where the discussion went the first time we did this was really, really cool. So with that being said, I don't really know where tonight's going to go, and that also really excites me. So I know some of you told me that you watched the little video that Georgie posted, which was awesome. Like, that was about 5 months ago. I got to go and speak to about 450 Lululemon employees and give them this 15-minute like kind of keynote, pump-up, inspirational talk, and probably spent 40 hours getting ready for it, because it's like you're on the big stage, and it also is that's a community that I love. It's like family, so I want to add value to them. These types of conversations are so different, and I want them to be different. I don't want it to be groomed and polished, like to the like very pause, right? I had like practiced that thing to get it ready, and I want this to be totally different. So before I jump in and kind of talk about where I want to go, I just want to ask if there are any kind of burning questions that are on your mind when you were driving here, when you're watching the video, or something that you like, I guess that's on your mind that I can kind of put in the back of my head, so as I'm going through this, I may be able to address it. And obviously we'll have a whole bunch of time at the end to talk about questions, but I just wanted to get a sense. Are there things that specifically that you want to hear about? Or yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Robert. Thanks for having us. The question I have is just looking, Georgie invited me, so thanks for the invitation, and saw that you had tried qualifying for the Olympics prior to this. Is that true?
I didn't get as close to trying, but I can talk about some of those experiences.
Yeah, and why now you're coming back in a different sport?
Yeah.
How that completely changed, because there's a lot of business owners, and sometimes they try and fail and may come back, or the business may evolve in a completely different direction.
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay, thank you. Any others? We'll come back and we'll talk about that. Okay, so if they do come up, just throw them out there. Like, this is, I want to keep this kind of as informal as possible. So what I thought I could do tonight is share a little bit of context about who I am, my life, what my life looks like right now, just to kind of set the backdrop. And then one of the questions that I get asked a lot, and I've presented this one other time, like drawn this stuff out, and I did it about 3 months ago, and I did it because a lot of people ask me, like, how do you do this? Like, why do you do it, and how do you do it? Like, what's kind of going on in your head to say you want to go to the Olympics and chase these crazy dreams, and so I put some thought into that, and I wrote out, okay, here's what's going on in my head when I think about that. And as I walk through this, I want to share little anecdotes into my story, and that's kind of a way that we can. One of my goals tonight is to add a little bit of value, right, to hopefully everybody here, and I'm going to learn from you as we get into the conversation. But the goal for tonight isn't just about fundraising, and which I want to talk about and express my gratitude and appreciation. We can talk about the pains of trying to go to the Olympics in Canada as a 30-year-old athlete. Somewhat past his prime if you look at like what Athletics Canada looks for. But I want this to be valuable. I want this to be valuable for all of us. So by drawing out this mind map, I'm hoping there will be some little nuggets here and there that you guys can pick up. Does that sound good? Okay, awesome. So, context. And I'm going to keep this brief, and again, all this stuff we can revisit. So, said I'm 30 years old. I just turned 30. I have a wife. We just celebrated our 5-year anniversary about 2 weeks ago. We have 2 little girls. One's 2 years old. Her name's Olea, and the second one is Bella, and she's just about 5 months. I work full-time downtown in Vancouver for about a 300-person technology organization, and I essentially am on the senior leadership team, and I do a combination of product management and strategic facilitation and team, strategic planning and team facilitation. And then I'm chasing this Olympic dream, and I've been doing it for about 2 years, almost about 2 years to right about now. And it is, I guess, technically I believe it's the 4th sport that I've tried to pursue the Olympics in. And just quickly, and again, we'll circle back, I played basketball, Division I basketball, and then essentially played for the national team, was gonna go play overseas. Basketball is not a good sport to play if you wanna go to the Olympics, because Canada doesn't ever qualify. I tried out for the men's bobsled team, men's 4, sorry. So got essentially invited to Calgary to train for a year and kind of make the path to, I believe at that time it was 2010, the 2010 Olympics. And I just realized that there's something that is in a bobsledder's brain, and it's not a screw is loose, but that kind of thing. Like, I was talking to these guys, and they were describing the story of going down the hill at like 120 kilometers an hour, and you could just see so much excitement in their head. And I was like, I don't have that. I couldn't do that for 4 years happily. And then I actually did qualify for the men's 8 national rowing development team, so to train over in Victoria and train for the 2012 Olympics, which was really exciting for me. And I had to have this tough conversation with myself. What would it mean for our family? And can I really handle the incredible amount of pain that is the sport of rowing? So if you've read anything about rowing and the amount of like physical and emotional kind of pain that you go through because of how hard it is, I didn't think I could do that, just honestly, to myself. So here I am throwing discus, and I'm training for the 2020 Olympics, and there's a chance that I want to train for 2024, seeing how 2020 goes. In the last piece of context is, if you look at a discus thrower's life cycle, lifespan, as long as they're healthy, there's guys that are throwing right now at the Olympic level that are 37, 38, that's kind of the top end. So I'll be in a good place if I can make it to 2020 healthy, and then have a whole bunch of technical progress that I can make. So that's the context. The next thing I want to talk about is what Georgie said, and this is actually something, I guess that's really recent. Like, despite, I think you're right, like there's some things in my life that I've always come back to, and I've always felt that they're really important. But this concept in my life that I have no idea what's gonna happen with this board, we're just gonna see where it goes. So this is from a what I do every day, and like how I get excited and how I really add value in the world. There's really only three areas that I know that I can show up at my very best. And the first one is leading, developing, or supporting teams, right? The second one is having that same role, especially from a development perspective, in leaders, so individuals, but that really want to play leadership or management roles in business. And the last one, and the most significant one, this is going to get a little bit ugly, is human, right? Human development, human performance. What does it look like for, like, the question that I'm really hungry and really after in this journey is, what does it look like for us to live at our absolute best and sustain that level of effort or that kind of space that we're in over days, weeks, months, years, decades, a lifetime, right? Which I've come to realize is really hard to do. And there's a whole bunch of pieces to this, but I'm realizing more and more as I work, as I get more exposure to work and a whole bunch of, just different things in my life, that I keep coming back to these things. And so tonight I really want to talk about the human aspect and that question. How do we live the very best? And to do that, I need to start at the place, my scary happy place. Let's just call it that. And I'll draw it right in the middle, and I don't, we'll run out of space on some side of the board, but this is my life. So this concept of the deep end, like I have been living in the deep end since 8 or 9 years old. And So some of you may already have like a visceral feel of what this is, like to be living kind of just outside of your comfort zone, doing something that is pushing your limits. And what I've tried to do in my life is figure out, you know, what does this thing look like? What does it feel like? Like, what does it feel like when I'm out of my comfort zone, pushing my limits, but also in alignment with the things that I really care about. So developing myself as a human, developing others, working with teams. So a lot of the work that I do at my company, Build Direct, I'm in the deep end when I'm in really challenging team facilitation experiences. But generally the course of my life has been, you know, Division I basketball, right? That was my first kind of initiation into the deep end when I was, you know, I kind of made the transition into really chasing that goal when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I'll talk a little bit about that story, and I certainly talked about it in that video. I gave some context of what the deep end looks like. I tried to go to the CrossFit Games, which is another one we can go into, my leadership role at Build Direct, and now, of course, the Olympics. So, like, I think what I've come to realize is that this is the space that I always want to play in, to the point where it doesn't really matter the what, like what I'm doing, if I'm working at Build Direct or working on my own or going to the Olympics or CrossFit or playing basketball. These are very different vehicles, but they've all landed me here, right? And it's part of this, like, I know one of the secret formulas in my head is if I want to get into this space, I have to get a little bit crazy in terms of the things that I want to accomplish and the places that I want to push myself. What's interesting, and I'm going to talk about, okay, what does it mean to like be in the deep end? Because I feel like this is where magic happens, this side of the board right here. But there's a more interesting question, which I'm battling right now, and hopefully we'll get into that a little bit, is how do you get here? Like, what does it look like to go from not being comfortable, like the easiest way is saying being comfortable and being uncomfortable. And what I've come to learn, right, you're gonna see my drawing skills being tested here, is there's this thing that is a qualifier to be in the deep end. And I call it the high dive. So this idea that before we can pursue anything great, right? Before we can really put ourselves in this intersection of following our kind of core values and passions and the things that we really care about, and doing it in a space that is not only pushing our limits and like accelerating our growth, but it's also adding the most value to others over time. It's kind of that sweet spot that we're playing in. There's typically a big, massive diving board that you have to climb up and jump off of, right? And so I talk about in that video this like visual, visceral, I guess image in my head or visualization of like being up on the diving board and like kind of like looking over, and you can see the deep end down there. You know that your passion, the thing that you want to chase in life, is down there, but it scares the hell out of you, right? Like you have no idea, like, okay, how deep is it? Where are the safe zones? How long am I going to have to be down there to actually succeed? Which is something that we'll talk about as well. And then comes these stories, right? I'm not good enough. What if I fail? Any other? Feel free to yell out any stories, that because this is a place we have all been, right? We have all been here. We can all share this, big and small. It doesn't really matter. A big one for me right now, if I'm being totally honest, is responsibility for Tash, my wife, and my kids. Right? Financially, that's a big story in the back of my head. I have to make sure that they're okay, that they're safe. So does that change the decisions in my head? But what's interesting about all of this, and again, these are things that I'm jumping all over the place a little bit because this is kind of just being digested in my head over the last several weeks, is one thing that I realized is that the first time that I went through this experience of climbing up on the high dive and jumping into the deep end and going and chasing something that I really wanted to do, even though literally, when I was 10 years old, people were telling me I was crazy. I was tricked. The first time I did this, I was tricked. I was tricked into jumping off the high dive. Because I was only 10 years old. And I was sitting at the couch in our house, and my parents and myself, and I think my middle brother Jordan were watching NCAA Division I March Madness basketball, right? As many families with boys do in March. And I just remember, I just started playing basketball a year or two before, and I just remember seeing like, these huge stadiums and these superstar basketball players, 20, 30,000 people, and thinking in my head, like, I want to go do that. Like, I want to be on that floor. And at some point in the near future, I voiced that to my parents, which maybe it was my like fatal mistake or like beautiful like pivot point in my life, because they said something pretty simple. When I said, I want to go play like those guys, March Madness, Division I. Didn't really know what that was or what it meant, or even that it was like in the United States. Like all those concepts weren't really clear to me, but I just wanted it. And they said, okay, you need to write it down, right? We need to kind of declare it as a goal. You can put it up on your wall above your bedroom. That was literally all it took for me to take this jump, right? They had encouraged me without me really, because like clearly I did not know what this world would look like for the next 10 years or 7 years of my life, right? This was a scary, 2 years later, and I'll paraphrase it for those who have watched the video, right? I went from that moment of jumping off the deep end, or jumping off the high dive kind of unknowingly, to being shipped off to Philadelphia, playing for a coach and a team that I didn't know, right? To get exposure to AAU, kind of like starting to go down that path. My parents weren't with me. My coach, who I met at the airport for the first time in my life, which my high school coach and my parents hadn't met, picked me up. I lost my luggage. Instead of driving me to like his home or somewhere safe in Philadelphia, he said, actually, we're going to New Jersey. And about 8 hours from when I left Vancouver to when I stepped out of the door at New Jersey, I realized like I'm completely alone. And my coach literally drove off for 5 days. And like that was it. And this was when I was 10 years old. So like, there was only payphones and like there was no such thing as cell phones. I couldn't talk to my parents. I was in the deep end, and that's kind of what the next 7 years of my life looked like. But what I realized is that I'm really lucky. Like that may have been the biggest gift that my parents gave me, because they showed me that this, as scary as this is, like this is so scary in my life right now. It's worth it. Like it's always worth it. Even if you fail, like even if I, go down the path of like going to the CrossFit Games was a good one. I invested 3 years of my life into this, and we missed qualifying by one spot, by like a couple dozen points, like a pretty small margin. It was so worth it, right? It's always worth it. And the reason why it's worth it, I'm going to keep kind of moving through here, is because the deep end gives you this opportunity, right? This is what I've realized, is that when you're in the deep end, you're in the unknown, and eventually I will spell a word wrong. This is a privilege to be here in my mind, because this is where magic happens. You have these massive challenges, huge adversity, and obstacles that most of the time, if you're really pushing your limits, seem completely insurmountable. And hopefully some of you have a sense of, or know what this feels like. And this is a really scary but a really fun place to be, especially for me, knowing that like the world isn't going to end if I fail, even though a lot of times it feels like it. And eventually, you hit one of these challenges or obstacles or adversity that literally is a wall. And I know we talk about or at least in the world that I am, whether it's athletics or kind of personal development and human performance, we talk about obstacles and walls and challenges as things that you can run through the wall and you'll get knocked down, but then you can run through it and you're okay. Or you can kind of pick yourself back up and figure out your way around it, and you can keep moving forward on your path. But I truly believe that if we're pursuing greatness, and for me, greatness is this concept of pursuing something at a world-class level, which, again, I have a naive belief that we all are capable of this in some capacity, right? And the beauty is that it'll look different for every single one of us in this room. My belief is that if you're doing that and you're in the deep end, in that space, you'll hit a wall that will literally knock you on your butt to the point where you can't get up. Shatter you to pieces. And the best analogy, again, it's in this video, and I think it has stuck with me so long because because it was so visceral, and it drove this point home, although I didn't really recognize it until years later, is that trip to Philadelphia when I finally did get on a payphone to talk to my parents and like get them to rescue me, because I was on the other side of the continent at 12 years old, and I was completely stranded. I begged them to let me give up. Like, I asked them, whatever you're willing, like, just let me come home. That's what I was remember sobbing on the phone with my parents and just saying, I can't do this. Like, tell me I'm not good enough. Tell me that I can't do this. That was not a wall I was going to move through on my own, right? So this is the wall that breaks you. And there's actually, I want to share an experience from this past year, because it's relevant to Discus, and it's the last most painful kind of breaking point experience I had. So Bella, our second daughter, was born April 10th. She's a C-section. It was scheduled, which actually made this possible. I knew that I had to be in LA on the 12th to compete of April. So you can imagine the dynamics, right? And I knew this a month or so before, or 6 weeks. I had to have this conversation with Tash, right, which wasn't a fun one. Having a C-section is a pretty big deal, as we knew from Olia, our first girl. But she said, go, like, you have to go. This is part of your journey. You have to be down there competing. Going to LA, what it meant was throwing against the top, I guess 5 of the top 20 or 30 throwers in the world for the first time. So it was kind of my first exposure to the world stage, and it was a big deal. So 48 hours after Bella's born, we're still in the hospital. We kind of finally make our way home. We get checked out. Tasha's doing amazing, as she always does, but obviously it's still under like a lot of trauma from the C-section. And that evening I have to go to the airport, drive myself to the airport and get on a plane. So I make my way down to LA. And I realized, because this conversation has been in the back of my head at that point, really unknowingly, right? Like that, I put such a financial burden on myself in our family, and also in track, like in my season, that I was cutting at that point as many corners as I could to make it affordable, right? Flying down to LA. So for example, I flew the cheapest flight, I believe, which is Allegiant, which was not super fun. But also they have a weight limit on your carry-on bag. And so I made sure I packed kind of as little as possible, didn't bring my discuses, just brought a pair of shoes, didn't even really bring a bag that I could like throw over my shoulder to go to the track. And so I started realizing all of these things as I pulled up to the track for the first event of 3, that I was like, I'd pigeonholed myself into this corner of being a complete amateur. And like the word I come back to is kook, right? I felt like a kook. So what I mean by that is I showed up at the track, and only at that point I realized I didn't have any bag except for my carry-on suitcase to like bring to the actual track and field and put all my stuff in and show up, beside the discus ring. And, and guys typically have like track and field bags for that. You can imagine they don't walk up with these like rolling suitcases. So I knew I couldn't go out and buy one. So I walked to a grocery store, which is about 2 kilometers away. This is like 3 hours before I competed. I got grocery bags. I put all my gear in my grocery bags, walked back to the track, put all my stuff in there. So at that point I had walked about 5 kilometers before a throwing event, which I now know is not a good idea. Then I show up, and there's all these guys who are all-stars, right? Guys who have competed at world championships. They are the best in the world. And I realized I don't have any discuses to warm up with. Like I knew this, like I'm smarter than this, or I should have been, that in these types of competitions that are at this level, like every single athlete brings 2 discuses, you have about 15 minutes to warm up, and you typically get about 6 throws, right? That's like what you want to bank on. But it means literally you have your 2 discuses, you go and throw them, people bring them back, you take your own discuses again. And so I realized I was in this predicament where I had no discuses. These events don't bring implements for the athletes because they don't need to, because everyone's a world-class athlete except for me. And so I had to go and kind of like tap on these guys' shoulders who were like the best athletes in the world and just say, hey, would you mind if I borrowed one of your discuses just to warm up? Like it was the most humiliating experience, and I just kind of got caught in this whirlwind of being like, I'm so underprepared. I'm treating myself like an imposter. Needless to say, I had the worst 3 days or 2.5 days of competition in my life. Like I had been throwing at that point for over a year and a half, and the marks that I threw were worse than the end of the season previous, or the beginning of the season previous. And so here I was on the plane, flying back to LA, and just like devastated, right? I was holding back my tears, just feeling like I had, totally undermined and sabotaged Tash and her like recovery from having a human being, not being there for Bella, not being there for Aaliyah, and totally failing, right? And I just remember this conversation actually just before I got on the plane of like, why am I doing this? Like, what the heck am I doing? I threw 20 meters under the Olympic standard at these meets, like massive. And I don't think that I would have given up at that point, but the thought crosses your mind a lot. And I remember, it's incredible. Like, I had this conversation with Tash in my hotel room as I was about to leave for the airport. And she was like, you know what, this is part of it. She basically said, this is part of the journey and it sucks. But you're exactly where you need to be. Like, this is exactly what it's gonna feel like sometimes. She's like, come home, we'll take a day, like we'll relax, you'll see your baby for like the 3rd time since she's been alive, and we'll regroup, right? Like, so this concept of having a tribe, having that group there that essentially knows where you're trying to go better than you do yourself. And they are willing to call you on it when you try and, put your tail between your legs and walk down the high dive, kind of get out of this game. So for me, one thing that I'm really curious about in my journey now is I know some of these things exist. So like, what are the things in the next 3 to 7 years that are gonna be my walls? And I think it's a good exercise for everyone to do, right? Just in general, as we're going through life. I know, for example, relationship, right? My relationship with Tash and my kids and family is something that is constantly needs to be intentional for me. Otherwise, this presents a major issue. Coaching and progress, right? So my coach and I, when we first started 2.5 years ago, we had this conversation of saying there may be a point where my coach Garrett saying, Tyrell, you can't get any further with me. Like, I can't take you the next piece. You have to go up to Kamloops or over to Victoria or down to California for 3 years or 2 years, however long it takes. That's a real potential in the next 3 to 7 years of my life. And then one of the biggest ones, one of the things that is on my mind the most now is career. Where like I'm working this intense, incredibly stressful, senior kind of reporting role that consumes, 40 hours a week, but a lot of energy. You can imagine like trying to do, my days are 16 hours and I fit 3 training sessions and a full work day into every single one of them. This is eventually gonna suck energy more than it feeds like my family, this thing. All that being said, you gotta know who these people are, right? Tash, Garrett, my coach. This is my inner tribe. My parents have always been there. Okay, so this is the circle. This is what I believe happens in the deep end. It happens in the unknown. Kind of the equation that I've tried to equip myself with as I've navigated this path. It was the same one that I did organically when I was playing Division I, as that experience in Philadelphia kind of started to teach me like, oh, I went down and I played basketball at Portland State University, which is a Division I NCAA. We ended up going and playing at March Madness for 2 years, and I was able to captain our team both of those years. But there were a lot of nights where we were on road trip. I can remember being on road trips and like all the team being on the van kind of like right here and me being off kind of between the hotel and the van talking to my mom or talking to my dad in tears, like just being at the end of my rope. It was so hard and it's driven like so much of a business down there. And it's so simple what they're able to say. And again, going back to that video, one of the things that my parents were always able to really do, and Tash has done it as well, is she just said, they say, it's just one more day. Like all you need to do is survive one day. And this idea of, don't make a decision right now, sleep on it. Let's talk in the morning and let's just see if you can survive one more day. That's how I got through Philadelphia. And that's literally how I got through probably 2 years of basketball down in the States. So if you have the tribe in place, you basically have the privilege of going back to step one, right? And this is what our journeys in the deep end look like. But I want to talk about what this means and why it's important. And I'm going to pause for after I go over this point to do a little pulse check on where we should go. there's a couple things that if you look at what's happening in this cycle that's going on, sometimes at a daily basis, sometimes over months or even years, you have a lot of the ingredients for this thing called flow. And I'm sorry, Georgie, I'm going to keep trying to like shift over so you guys can see it, see the board. So I don't know how many of you have heard of this concept of flow or optimal performance, but it's essentially a state, right? A state of being where you have all of these ingredients from risk to intrinsic motivation to some real concept of impact or meaning or purpose. And it essentially is a heightened state of performance. There's lots of research and study that have gone on in this place, but I kind of have self-professed, I guess, that I feel like I'm a flow junkie. Like I'm looking for these spaces. I'm looking to be in this loop because I know it creates these moments where I feel like, in the athletic analogy, it's like time is slowing down and you can just see everything unfolding and you're literally in control of this heightened state of awareness. In the boardroom, over the last, 5 to 10 years, I've really learned, what does this feel like for me? Sorry, I don't know where I'm pointing at, Bill Direct, somewhere around here. What does this feel like in the boardroom? Because it exists there too. And I realize that there's some days, and it's happened a lot recently, so it feels very present, where I'll be facilitating team sessions that are really, really intense, like high stakes, sometimes lots of tension or debate. And I'll get out of like an 8-hour day of doing that, and I'll just feel like I'm buzzing. Like I can feel like my pulse in my fingers. That's flow. That's like when you're in your element. So this is really important. The other thing that ends up happening is, and we can come back and talk about flow, is you get these things that start adding up, right? So this concept of continual learning and growth. One that I love, that I'd love to come back and talk a little bit more about, what I call it is subtle swagger, or capacity. And really what I think the biggest intrinsic driver is, we get a glimpse into the fact that our human potential is pretty boundless, right? For me, that's what when I realized I've made a full trip on this circle, when I was flying back from Philadelphia that first time, I was like, if you can survive this, like everything that I'd gone through in that traumatic 3-week experience, or it ended up being about 5 weeks, like what can't you do? What can't you survive? And at that point, I was then 13, because I actually had my birthday when I was in Las Vegas on one of those trips. But I thought I could conquer the world as a 13-year-old because I had overcome one of these loops. So this is kind of the value that I think comes out of being in this space. And I'll come back to that. So I've probably missed a couple pieces. Let me just do a quick double check. There's a couple more pieces that I want to talk about. I do want to pause here because this is the first pass and the kind of foundation that I want to add a couple of layers on. Are there any questions, or is everyone up for me going a layer deeper?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So this is where I think it gets exciting. So now the question in my mind over the last 10 years especially has been, how the heck do you do this? Like, this is brutal. And we all know this, because I'm a true believer that we've all been through this in some space, and you know those moments where you're in this unknown and it feels gross and awkward and uncomfortable, but you also kind of know, like, man, I'm in this space that's really cool and exciting and new, and I feel like there's something there. And then the adversity that we hit, the wall, which emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally can be just totally taxing and draining. And to do that loop a whole bunch of times over the course of weeks, months, years, I think is really challenging. And so one of the things that I've tried to continually do, I'm going to see, where am I going to go with this? Okay, is zoom in. So what does my environment need to look like on a daily basis to create the space and essentially the capacity for me to be living in the deep end as much as possible? And this is this is an evolving conversation constantly, which is kind of the whole point of all of this. But what I've realized is that there are a few things that are really important to me, like part of my equation to being in the deep end, jumping off the high dive, that I keep coming back to and I keep being mindful of every day. And again, a few of these are really new in terms of my articulation of them. So the first one that I want to talk about, and I'm not going to go into huge detail with these, but this zoom in aspect is really the human performance, like tangible, like how do we up our game at a day-to-day performance showing up in the world level. One of the things that I'm really passionate about right now is kind of a sidebar is I launched, because I'm living in this space, obviously a lot in my head, I feel like, and I'm in the corporate world, which to me there's like a very big spectrum in terms of this type of thinking, and a lot of the people who show up for a monotonous job every day. And so I've started to ask myself, okay, what would a human performance total equation look like that you could provide as a program to, right now it's people in the workforce and teams, athletic teams, but this concept of a human performance lab, right? We have a whole bunch of these different aspects of what it looks like to show up at your best. When I talk about zoom in, that's really what I'm talking about. So this concept of impact windows for me is fascinating because it's so counter everything that I hear and see in the work world. So what I believe is that this equation, and especially where we can access flow states, happens way up here. So I'll just call it flow, but this is also our impact window. And then at the bottom, and I apologize if I'm going into too much detail, but I kind of nerd out on this stuff a little bit. We have this thing called recovery, right? So we have a recovery window. Everything in between is essentially this like purgatory of diminishing returns. So energy decreases linearly over time, and all of our output, our performance, how we show up decreases as well. What I believe the 9 to 5 kind of grinded out workday looks like is, if you're lucky and you have things like nutrition and other stuff dialed in, you may get a little glimpse of this at the beginning of the day. But then you essentially start going down, and eventually, some people who, I've observed, some people who go out for a really social lunch, if that's something that fires them up and gets them excited, sometimes can get a little dip in here where they go into recovery and then they come back up and they can find a little impact window, but then go down pretty quickly. What I think this could look like, and what I'm really curious about, is what if you structured your day so that you optimized for, this, again, the nerdy part of me, so if you optimize for energy deltas. So this idea that you make as many broad shifts in your energy as possible. Meaning that I get up, so for me, I'm at work at 6 or 6:30 in the morning. I work for a few hours, or not even, maybe a couple hours. I go down the road and I meditate for 20 minutes, and then maybe even I have a 20-minute nap, which I try and do 2 or 3 times a week. I come back to work for a little bit longer, go for an hour and a half workout session, training session. That used to be CrossFit, that was something that just absolutely shifted my energy, got me into a recovery window. Then I come back to work and you kind of see how it goes, right? You find these opportunities to recover during the day, and you actually are able to do more meaningful work, but you actually work less net hours, and that's the real, you tell that to a lot of people in the corporate world and they're like, I could never do that, or our company would never let us do that. And so that's what makes me really excited about this, is we're at this point where there's not enough research in the corporate world around how valuable things like mindfulness and meditation, or exercise, or even the amount of study around people who are able to socialize with each other in a non-work environment at some, take themselves out of the work context, even with the same people, and get in a totally different headspace and then come back to work, are more productive, right? So all these things around output and performance and being up in that impact window. But one thing that's interesting is that you can't really do this, you can't really navigate this path if you don't know the answer, or are asking yourselves the question to energy suck versus energy fill, right? So for me, believe it or not, I'm hugely introverted. I have a huge time, it is very energy draining or sucking for me to be in a really social environment, having lots of small talk. I just know that's not my space. Equally, I know that things like exercise and pushing my body really hard is almost the opposite of that. And we all have these different energy suck versus energy fill equations. And This is the exact same conversation that I try and encourage my colleagues and people in the work world to have with themselves as well. What things in the spectrum of the job that I do or the opportunities that I have at work, like, get me so jazzed to where I can feel my pulse in my fingers, and what things absolutely suck the energy out of me, right? And the goal over time is to do obviously more of the former and less of the latter. But essentially when you combine these two, you can start to play with finding the recovery, like figuring out what your recovery windows are in terms of the energy fill activities. So like an example that a slightly tough decision, just to put it in really practical terms, is one of the teams that I work with, you know, they go out for lunch 2 or 3 times a week. And I choose to say no to going out for lunch with them because I know that it's not going to get me in one of these spaces. Like, I'll either work through lunch, or I'll go down and meditate, or I'll go and get a workout in, or even just go for a walk, right? Because that's really filling for me. This is like a constant inquiry within ourselves, right? We all intuitively probably know a lot of these things, but then have to learn them over time. The next one is really simple. I'm not going to touch on it a lot, but it's just simply fuel, right? And this is going to be a really, like, as this whole mind map evolves, this one is going to become more and more important for me, I think. So I've always known the like food, I would put sleep in here even. Just the things that you need at a basic level to fuel your body, the inputs. And I'm reading more and more about this and just actually realizing, man, like, you've known about nutrition and food and what to eat and what not to eat for 20 years. I've been taught this through like things like high performance basketball, but I really don't even know the beginning. But again, like, we are our best test subject. So like, for example, right now like, at any given time, I'm trying a few different things in terms of like the things that I'm putting in my body and how it feels going out. Pretty simple equation, but being intentional about this makes a very big difference to the amount of capacity that we have in terms of the circle. So I'll leave that one because I think it's the most well-known at all these. And then finally, again, another thing that I've added since throwing discus is this concept of hell yes or no. So how we make decisions every single day, and we make hundreds of them, has a significant impact on like how much energy we have, how much of that we are able to invest in this. And this is hard to do, right? It's not easy to do. So in the last year, there was an example. The first time that I gave this presentation, I was like fresh off of this really tough decision, but good, like, internal check of, I had a friend that called me and he said, the Olympic speed skater Apollo Ono, who's like this incredible celebrity and has won a bunch of Olympic medals, he's up in Vancouver. I know you, I know him, I wanted to connect you guys, and just, you could go for coffee and just chat, like, just get an opportunity to meet an Olympian who's known for having grinded his way through his incredible, prestigious career. And I thought, wow, like, one of the most decorated American Olympians ever. I could sit down and have coffee with him. That would be amazing. And then I realized, like, okay, it's on a Saturday, so I have a four-hour training block, and then I have to get home so that Tash can have a break in her life. And, like, you know, if she doesn't have that, then this whole thing doesn't work. And so after talking to Tash and going back and forth with this person trying to figure it out, I just realized, like, it was so clear. Like, this is a no. This is a no. Like, it does not trump my training. It does not trump my family. It's a no, and that sucked. Same thing, there's this big yoga conference up in, I guess, I don't know if it's a yoga conference, it's called Wanderlust. It's up in Whistler. It's pretty massive. So I had an opportunity to go and give a keynote presentation there 2 years ago. Realized it was at the same time as a family vacation. Could have potentially made both work, but would have compromised the time I had with my family, which is not very much, as you can imagine. And so again, I had to call those Lululemon up and basically say, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I probably won't get it again. I can't do it. I don't really see my friends, you know, it's not really a concept of partying once you have kids, but, you know, these are things that are in that hell yes or no bucket. So this has been a little bit of my journey through like what are the equations in my day-to-day life that I go to over and over again. Like, I'm doing this iterative loop and asking myself these questions and then evaluating every day just to say, like, where did I drop the ball? Where did I say yes to something that really was a no? And that's like so fun. I mean, for me, it's really fun because you have this, I don't know what it's called, like an energy clash, where for me, I go and I commit to something and I'll show up, and it can be a big prestigious event, which is usually the thing that draws our ego in and makes us say yes in the first place, kind of the look at me. But you just realize, for me, I realize going to the event or the thing, being there, and then coming home, this like emptiness, kind of this like, that did not fire me up, even though it may have been something amazing. Really getting a gut check on how to figure those out in the future is important. So zoom in, human performance, basic levels. The last part of this piece that I want to touch on is the opposite, and I'll change colors again, just so. So, zoom out. This is where I'm going to kind of close formally, and it's a topic that intrigues me the most. So the question that I ask is, what is all of this in service to? Right? Why do this? At a macro level, and you asked that great question earlier, right? Why? Like why? Why are you doing it? And it's because I think, let me see what I wrote down here. Oh yeah, I want to add something to the zoom in that will, so if this is, zoom in is, I like to call the war of attrition. And I can tell a beautiful story about what this means. We can come back to this. Zoom in is all about the war of attrition. Zoom out is the long game. Okay, so for me, the questions that I'm really interested in, and we'll see if I get all of these out. So something like these, I'm sorry, these are kind of nerdy, and like they're in my own head. The time value of learning. So another way to think about this is, what is the value of compounded learning over time? Because what I've realized is that that's all this is. All of this, for me, is just a vehicle to learn faster. And so whether it's the Olympics, and I guess this is hopefully maybe another way to answer your question, or the CrossFit Games, which was a failure in that chapter, or Division I, or being a leader, or figuring out how to be a dad and a husband and all of this, it's just an ability for me to learn at an accelerated rate. And those vehicles, like the Olympics, gets me into this flywheel, but then on the output, I get all of these things, and a lot of them, if you look, aren't really related to Discus. Like, there's not a lot of stuff up here related to Discus. And Discus is going to be a vehicle that's in my life for a certain chapter, but it's not going to define me. And that's one thing that I think, again, because of how my parents guided me through this journey, it wasn't about, you hear a lot of stories about people having their identity intertwined with a sport, which happens, and it'll happen with Discus as well for me in some ways. But at the very least, I was able to start pulling those things apart and say, basketball, when I was really young, what it showed me was that basketball was a vehicle for me to learn about leadership. And what I mean by that is, I realized through being bullied, really, kind of painfully, when I was young in grade 7, and then trying to figure out, like, why did that hurt so much? Like, it was grade 12s, that basketball players that I idolized, I looked up to, I loved. They were the ones that bullied me. And I started to understand the influence dynamics, right? They're bigger, they're these all-stars, they're people that I want to be, and therefore I invest so much of my interest and my stake in them and who they are and what they do. And then I started to look around at that point and realize, I'm a basketball player. I'm in a kindergarten to grade 12 school. Therefore, there are littler kids than me that are looking up to me and maybe making those same connections. And the light bulb kind of going off and realizing, wow, everything you do, someone is watching. Like, you are having an impact whether you like it or not on every single person. And that was this first moment for me where I realized basketball isn't just a sport. And certainly for me, it wasn't just a sport. It was this vehicle to do a whole bunch of other things. And so why I say all of that is because it's not really about Discus. It's not really about this 6-year chapter for me, or potentially 9 years. We're playing a really long game. And that gets me so excited. And it also, in some ways, de-risks every single dive off the high dive, right? Because nothing's permanent. And if I spend 3 years trying to go to the CrossFit Games and don't succeed, 3 years on the scale of 60 or 70 or 80 is really, really small. And it doesn't even matter because you learn so much more being in this space trying to chase something that's really important than if I was sitting, which is where I would have been, right here, right? Because I would have backed myself off the high dive, walked all the way down, and done something that was way more comfortable. So, as I look at my trajectory, right, what does the long game look like? And what are the interesting conversations that we can start to have around it? Division I, CrossFit Games, learning how to be a leader, facilitator, my career at Build Direct, family, Olympics. But, if I look at the course of my life, this actually is much smaller than what this is. And so the things that get me really excited is what does this open up, right? If I can push myself this hard and get to the Olympics or fail, right, and get there's the realistic chance for me, right, that I'm gonna show up and be 10 centimeters short, and that's it. 6 years of training. But the amount that I would have learned and will have learned in that space, right, that sets up the next thing, right? I've started putting these out recently. What does Ironman World Championships look like? There's this weird dream in the back of my head about that thing, leading, a country, leading people. What does feeding 1 million people look like? So again, these are all hypothetical things, but I guess from my perspective, it doesn't really matter, right? Because as long as the context for me is I'm doing all of this in service of the long game, like, the crazy dreams are the best things to have. And there's nothing stopping anyone from doing that, or for having them. And they don't really matter, other than to get me certainly really excited and scared to death, because the fact that I'm starting to write some of those things up on the wall before I've really internalized them scares the hell out of me. But the point of all of this is that this whole entire thing, including this guy over here, which is a whole nother conversation, right? How do you define these things? What do they look like? All this is, all my life is one giant inquiry. And I realize that as long as I can pause and reflect, learn and grow, and essentially be in this flywheel as much as possible, like every additional day I could care less about in a lot of ways. And I've kind of, when I started, my kind of last point is when I started setting goals when I was about 6 years, or I guess 7 years old. We had a family summit where my parents would facilitate essentially a day of goal setting. And then since I was about 7 or 8, all the way until like 3 months ago, we get together once a year. We share our goals from the past year and share our goals, share how we did, and share our goals for the next year. And when I was that young, I was thinking about, okay, what is my 10-year goal? What is my 15-year goal? Like I was told to think really big and like structure your path to get there. And I've really moved away from that in the past years. And I kind of know the Olympics is my North Star from a where I need to go perspective. But it's way more about every single day, right? And being in this space for me, and the value that I place in trying to figure out these conversations versus trying to reverse architect the 15-year plan has been a major shift, I'd say, over the last 15 years of my life. So with that, I will pause and say thank you for listening. And now I'm really curious to get some thoughts or some questions, or we can transition into more of a conversation.
So I think if anyone needs to go to the bathroom or refill their glass, do that now. and then let's chat. 'Cause I have like 80,000 questions. But I do want to say, I can't even, that we are a yes.
Hell yes. No,
It's a hell yes?
There is no yes. It's just hell yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Actually,
So wasn't that awesome?
yes. And that was recorded, right?
Yes, it is
Now
recorded,
my
and we
voice.
will. Yes, it will be posted.
I want to meet. I want to meet the
Yeah.
16-year-old. Yeah, both of them. But
Lucas plays hockey, elite hockey, and he wants to be a hockey player. So that's going to be totally his thing.
yeah, yeah.
And he's been told no. There's only 700 in the world that plays
Yeah.
NHL.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to start with questions before I just ramble like crazy?
Well, there was a good question.
Yeah, Chris, what was your?
It was more of an observation, it wasn't really a question.
That's okay.
Tyrell had me going when he did the diving board, because there was a time in my life where to get something I really wanted, which was a job I was applying for, I had to jump off the high dive board at the Vancouver Aquarium. And I'm terrified of heights. And it was literally jumping into the deep end.
Yeah, love that.
But also it led into 20 years of a situation where what was missing was the tribe. So the unknown and the challenges and the walls and all that, it was like a one-woman show.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I agree, like, and you made a good point of, like, my comment was, and what I share is if you don't have the tribe, or you don't have the concept of what that thing is going to look like when you get to that wall that absolutely shatters you, don't jump, because you'll never make it, right? And you made a beautiful point of, like, I was doing the best with everything that I had, and I think that's a really valid point. And so, two thoughts come up for me. One is, then I kind of feel like, well, then it's up. Like, then you have to figure out how to learn that, right? As someone who's in the deep end, figuring out, okay, what's missing, right? And that's a really hard inquiry to go through. But the more interesting thing for me is, well, how do you inform? So if I'm thinking about kids who I get the chance to go and speak to every now and again, how do you set them up so that as they're up on that high dive, they know, okay, like, I got to figure out what this tribe thing is, and, like, it's a non-negotiable. Like, I'm not allowed jumping until I can start to architect that further down the road, because I think in a lot of cases, you either, especially, I mean, again, kids who are younger, they don't have the context of those things that are moving, and they're either fortunate enough to have it in parents or a coach or a mentor, or not have it, right? And if you don't have the context and you're just blindly, kind of shepherded down one path or the other, it's unfortunate, because there's a learning opportunity there. So that, I mean, in the back of my mind, that gets me excited, right? Of, like, how do you have that conversation with people who are ready to jump? They're, like, up there, they're like, okay, I need to go, to kind of equip them to say, okay, when you're on this journey, when you're climbing the mountain by yourself, here are the things that you're going to need, in your kit to make it up.
And what was so good that you mentioned also is that your tribe has to be so defined and so particular, because not everybody will support you, especially when you're scared or when you're told no. Like, one story I was sharing is my 16-year-old now wanted to, we were at the rec center in Westminster, and they love trampoline, both of them, and he wanted to do what the big guys were doing, which is the Shasta team, and they're going towards the Olympics, and they're training hard to be national athletes. And he was older, he was 13, and so he was told no because he was too old. So he came back all bummed out, and the conversation we had was, well, you can agree with it, or you could decide to challenge her and say, is it possible for me to challenge you and show you what I can do until the next training season? So he had the summer, and she said, yeah, show me what you can do during summer. So we went out, and he showed what he could do, and she came to me, she said, Sophia, I'm gonna give him the certificate myself. And it was a certificate because it's a closed facility, it's a closed group, so you need to be invited in. She said, I'm gonna give it to him because he worked hard, and we now want to invite him in. And that was a defining moment for him, because now if he works hard enough, he believes in himself, he can have the yes that he deserves. So that was really cool.
Yeah. That for me, what comes up is the moment on the plane when I'm like, wow, I survived this, right? That trip when I was really young, and just being like, if I can do this, what can I do, right? Which sounds like that was one of those moments in his life, like a defining moment of his own character.
And then how far he's willing to take it, or should he sit with feeling like, oh my God, well, what do I do now, or am I failing this, or am I choosing, can I push forward a little bit more? So that was really cool, and that brings back to that tribe and having the right people telling you yes, or you could do it, don't listen to the others saying no.
Yeah. I remember this really, it's funny how you have these snapshots of experiences and memories like we all do. Probably when I was like in grade 9 or 10, which was for me in my basketball career was the point where I went from being a really good player in Canada to being one of the top the top recruited player in the country and getting exposure and stuff like that. It was kind of right before that tipping point. And I was so like, went through a really depressed phase because I was so alone, and it was my first real exposure to like long-term loneliness that like my friends weren't, I had keys to our high school gym, so my friends weren't, were going out and hanging out with each other or going out and hanging out on the weekends, and I was like getting dropped off at the gym and then running home at like 11 p.m. at night. And I just remember being in my bed one night, and my parents obviously knew that I was like in this really deep slump. And my dad, it's so weird. It's like this snapshot. He came into my room, and I was lying down and kind of probably sobbing a little bit. And he just put his hand on my back, and he was like, Tyrell, nobody's gonna do this with you. Like, and he named off all of my best friends, and he was just like, none of those guys are on this journey with you. Like, you don't expect them to be there. They're not, like, you're doing this by yourself, and that because you're the only one that can do it. And there's something about that was painful, like it was an acknowledgement, but it was also really empowering because I knew that what I was doing was special, right? And like the context was nothing because my dad couldn't foresee that I was going to fulfill this goal or not, but that was a really empowering moment as a kid, right? It's not really knowing all these dynamics and the feelings that were going on with me as well.
This is a very, very, very powerful because a lot of people, if you have like a strong skill, something you're really good at, a lot of time it could be scary for some, or you might feel lonely because you're the only one that could do it. Like, and for a kid, it's really hard to understand. Like Lucas, he started playing hockey despite my wish, because it's 5 a.m. It's so early for parents. Really
You're amazing. You're amazing.
Thank you. But yeah, no, that's not really bad. Anyway, so one of the things that happened, and I was hoping, let's be honest, I was hoping he would suck at it.
Good, yeah.
Really good. And then, so what happened though for him that was really hard, and for a parent, I had to learn how to support him, was he got bullied, he got pushed because he worked hard. Yeah. The coach loves him because he's malleable, that's how they explain it to me. And he will start usually sometimes at the bottom of the team, end up one of the top scorers. He went from being left to the center in because he sees the game, he understands it, and he wants it bad. But what happens is there's inner fight inside his lines. They will pull him down, they will swear at him because he's in his powers, and he was alone, and he's lonely, and he's crying. And how do you support that when they're so young, right? Right?
Yeah.
That's so hard. So thank you. I'm going to share that with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm like really impressed at your routine, like because you work a full-time job and you still train. That's how do you keep yourself from burning out? And, you know, like what? Because you also have a family, so when you get home, you have your kids, and I couldn't imagine myself doing that. I would go, like, because I have 2 kids, and I have my own business, and it's a lot.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, so I'm just really curious to know like what you do to keep your.
So I have burnt out. To go over a brief list, I have had mono twice. I had mono twice in high school, both due to burnout. Been hospitalized about 4 or 5 times just due to like infections or like just total like body breakdown. I've had 2 staph infections. Again, not due to like contact, but just like like staph, you typically get it with an open wound. Both were like just my elbow basically blew up to a softball. Anyways, I have this track record of burning out. I like wear the badge of honor that has happened less and less over as time has gone on, which I think is really positive. And to be honest, I'm doing less and less. Which like when I say that, I'm doing less and less of the things that are portrayed as mandatory. Or so for example, like I wrote an article on this thing on impact windows, which we can figure out a way to share it, but what I alluded to is that in my role at work, there have been experiences where I do my best work, I do my game-changing work in a 6-hour period, and those 6 hours I know based on reflection are more valuable than the other 34 or 40 hours of the week combined. So I choose intentionally, and I'm okay to deal with whatever the repercussions are, to not work 50 hours a week, like in my desk, but to do a lot of this bouncing back and forth. So there are times in a week, and typically like when I'm in my kind of training season, I'm getting up at 5 or 5:30, at work by 6, and then I get home after the whole day around 8:30 or usually around 8:30. And by Wednesday, I can already feel like when I get up in the morning, I'm a little bit slower. Like there's all these leading indicators that I've come to realize. So I'll block off 2 hours in my day and I'll go and sleep for an hour at this meditation lab. And I'm
You're more aware of your body.
100%. And like, I would say as I've been intentionally really in tune to that, because I know I have this like chronic illness of burnout, you're like, pushing myself too hard. The leading indicators or the things that tell me that I'm going down that path have moved further and further up the chain of events, right? So for example, I remember one of the last times when I was doing CrossFit and I was making this transition into being like elite, trying to be a world-class level CrossFitter, I was pushing myself so hard, and there's this one workout one evening, super late. It was like my 3rd workout of the day, and I could feel myself in that moment. Even though I didn't know until a week later, that was like the turning point. I got done with that workout and I was like, something feels a little bit different. And I just kind of shook it off because I went home and slept and it was fine. But a week later, I was in the hospital with a stomach infection, and I could pinpoint it back to that one workout. But now the pins are landing further up, and so at the very least, I have the opportunity to make a course correction.
Yeah, and I think also like if you shake up your day with work, but also meditation, and then I think that also helps you to kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like that. Yeah.
And maybe you have no as well, like saying no to certain things that don't, like you mentioned, don't fuel you.
Yeah. But to me, it's a really intuitive process, right? Like, and I think that, like there's 2 sides of it. One, where am I like going down the path of burnout or doing too much or pushing too hard, but the other more like it's the race to the top and the race to the bottom. The bottom is burnout. The top is where am I doing my like world-class work, and what would it look like if all I did was world-class work? Because typically, like I think what I observe is that we're doing that work a vast minority of our time, and we're not really having the conversation of how could I just increase that by like 10% or 20%, because every small percentage increase of world-class work means a pretty significant decrease of all the other work that you have to do to be performing at a higher level, I guess. Like there's that play back and forth. That's a conversation that I'm really interested in, and I'm I love the Build Direct, the company that I work for, is definitely in that tribe as well. There's no question. Like they have been so supportive of me in this journey, because obviously my schedule is crazy, and
That is amazing. Like that really. I mean, do you work with them for? Have you been working with them?
Yeah, I've been there for 4 years.
Okay.
And so but I'm not conforming to what I would say the normal 9 to 5 working person is essentially not pressured, but sometimes obligated into, right? Like I'm pushing the boundaries a little bit and saying, I think I'm gonna be better, I'm gonna add more value to the organization, to the business, if I'm doing this type of work in these windows, versus just showing up and not doing, like, so it's
that talk with them, like,
yeah, and I'm just doing it, right? Like, and if I, like the beautiful thing is this is all a part of the feedback cycle. So if I get let go or were to get let go because of that, that would be a great feedback point to say, you know what, that, like, you may think you're doing better work, but you're actually not because you didn't prove it to the company. But so far, over the course of 4 years, that hasn't been the case. So those are good feedback indicators for me to push against and test some of these things, like impact windows, like telling my CEO, who's a close friend, like, hey, I need to go down and meditate and sleep for 45 minutes.
Your diet has to be on point, right? Like,
Yeah, no question. Yeah. I think so. At the end of the day, the last thing I'll say on that, which is the most important, is Tash is the reason why I can do all this, right? She's amazing and incredible, and
I can imagine, because like with 2 little kids and schedule, wow.
Yeah. So she's incredibly supportive and has really pushed me to, basically say, I know this is part of you, this is who you are, here's what's part of me, right? Let's come to the table and let's talk about it together. And like the amount of tough conversations that we have, like, so this cycle has, like, the way that I say that, what I'm trying to do and what we're doing will be the biggest catalyst to us not being together or to us having an incredibly deep relationship, right? Because we're basically going through debates, arguments, successes, joys at this hugely accelerated rate. And we're having to choose intentionally in the moment, like, are we gonna step up and have this conversation together, or are we gonna choose to be, all those things, defensive, protect, pride, ego, which over time, kind of builds the cracks in the relationship. Yeah. So, yeah.
I have a follow-up to the question to that. So because my focus is split, I may have missed something, but you're talking about the hell yes or no, and something, a family vacation became a no, or when you're saying no to the Lululemon thing, because it didn't work out for Natasha.
Yeah.
Why is that a no, and when are other things not, when it becomes essentially putting your family as a priority?
Yeah. How
do you decide when you put them first and when you don't?
Yeah, like this tonight, right? Like tonight for me is a really clear hell yes, and I think that's a really good question. Like that's a question for everyone, is what does that equation look like?
I think it's more of a gut feeling. Because your gut is what your brain is.
I have that. So I love the gut term, and I have this. It relates to the high dive, and it relates to this as well. Is that this is a great one because, like, to me, I feel like ego is so involved in the hell yes or no, because ego kind of clouds, like, if something is really appealing on the outside, and we'll, like the speaking event, right? That's a very ego-driven opportunity. It can cloud the gut, right? And so, like, I think in those moments, our gut is smarter and faster than our minds. So if you imagine the high dive, or you imagine the hell yes or no, that was perfect. In your gut what the right decision is, probably like in a flash.
The first thought that comes through.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes it's there and it stays, and those are great moments, even though we don't listen to them sometimes. And sometimes it just is there and then it's gone. And right after it, when you're standing up on the high dive, is all of those voices, right? All of those reasons. And so I totally agree with you. It is the gut. Your gut feeling, your intuition. The big question is how do you make that louder and louder, right, to the point where it overcomes, or does it only, like, it can be louder than all of the voices in your head telling you you should do something else. So it's been a lot of trial and error. Like, there are a lot of times.
I think you should just put a timer to your thoughts.
Yeah.
And the first 3 seconds, what went through your mind? That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first 3 seconds, right? Don't give yourself much time.
Yeah.
And then don't think anything more.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, it's scary. That scares me. I'm thinking of all the times I've been up here, and even right now, like, and knowing, like, that I know what the first thought
Too much
is.
time to
Yeah.
plan over there and done.
Yes.
Your work would probably come down.
You're right. You're exactly right. You're exactly
Just
right.
do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should have heard the thoughts when I'm like, do the Patreon page.
Yeah. 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 I'm super grateful that you pushed me to do that. There have been a lot of times where I've clearly made the wrong. A lot of them for me are relationship driven. So Tash is always my best gauge of understanding if I'm making the right hell yes or no in relationship to like the family. Because like that's the biggest thing that's at play, the variable. So a lot of the stuff in my life is structured. It's set in stone. Kind of it is what will be on my path to 2020. The places where I have room to flex are typically where these opportunities come up to say yes to something or no to something. And so that's been my best feedback loop to kind of tune up my gut or intuition. But yeah, it's just through trial and error, I think.
You guys like talk about it?
Yeah. I'll know. I'll generally know now if I make a decision to do something and it's not in hindsight it wasn't the right thing to do, based on not just that being the one factor, but like ultimately me knowing at a very deep level like what's really more important. Is it going to Wanderlust and speaking, or is it spending like not trying to mount the logistical nightmare of getting back from a family vacation, sacrificing that time with my family, all of those pieces. Yeah.
All right. Thanks first of all for extreme value. I think the comment you made earlier was that we can all compete at a world-class level in some capacity or in some way. So whether it's sport or business, whatever it is. And I know there's some people out there that are crazy. Some people do crazy, big audacious goals. I know I'm one of them. My wife is not. That's why we complement each other so well. But the question I have, two questions. First is for Natasha, your wife. How much input does she have into your hell yes or hell no's? Like when you come to her and say, hey, I have an event for example, tonight, or taking off to Nanaimo, or how much impact does she have or input?
So normally she has a ton. Like we make those decisions together, except this is a great, and I'll be fully transparent, tonight is a great example of that not being the case. And it, again, like so we had lined this up a long time ago, which was like six weeks, which in my world is a really long time. Which was incredible, right? And then for me, like I went into like crazy time at work, juggling, just kind of life got crazy, and I kind of didn't really stop to like acknowledge the shift. And so throughout it all, I mentioned it to Tash. I was like, okay, I have this event. I'm really excited. This is the dates, or the date, the time. And we were kind of like, okay. But I never really circled back to say, okay, like, do you know that I'm away? This is what's going on. Like, kind of giving her more the story of why it's a hell yes for me. And so this week we had like, I reminded her, we sat down and I was like, okay, I have this event, et cetera, and it kind of caught her off guard, right? It was hurtful to her, because I was taking away our time together. And so in all of that, for me, the great learning for me is that I need to be way more attuned to when my life gets more crazy, all like the variables of work and training and travel and all that, and how that compromises really small things, like sitting down with Tash and having like all it would have taken was a 20-minute conversation, and we both would have been hell yes, but I totally missed that, right? And that's what caused pain around this. So, I mean, it was really good learning for me, but yeah, it's definitely not perfect in terms of those things.
Second part is, this is a really great roadmap for those people who don't want to take big risks. Some of us have taken them. I know everybody probably has at some point in their life, whether or not it's saying yes to your spouse or, yes to that big job offer that's halfway across the country. But I truly believe that you should take this and either put it in a book or put it into a training course, because everybody talks about setting big goals, but nobody talks about a roadmap on how to go through it all. And thank you for that tonight.
Yeah, thank you. So my coming back to the gut. I drew this for the first time about 6 weeks ago, like I mentioned at the beginning, and I walked into this fundraising event, which was very similar to this, and I had no. Just because of having to literally pull the entire fundraiser off, I didn't have anything prepared. But I had this thing. I was like, so I wrote it up for the first time, and it really kicked off this the exact same conversation that you just kind of alluded to around what are the dynamics of what people need to. So this conversation of living at our very best, right? And as I dive more and more into this world of seeing what. A demographic that's really interesting to me is the working world, like employees in my company, right? I use that as kind of a control group of humans, of people. So seeing what the day-to-day looks like and the level of performance compared to what all of the literature and science and all of like everything that's telling us how to be better human beings, and what I've observed is that it's very siloed, and that you can read books on mindfulness and meditation, or you can read a book or learn something about diet. And what I appreciate the feedback, because the one thing that's kind of stood out to me is I love all of those areas. And so building the Human Performance Lab as a program that I can essentially lead and deliver, or we have 5 facilitators that come together and deliver all of those niches, those areas. But it starts with this is the first session, the dreamer, right? To build the roadmap where all of those siloed pieces play into, because I agree with you. Like I had that, the last couple of books I've read, I was like, this is great if you know exactly where you're going and you're on that path and all the pieces are in place to get you there. But what if you don't? Like how good is nutrition or meditation and helping your brain if you like don't really know where that's taking you? So I really appreciate the feedback, and I got similar feedback on the last one, which was the first time that it was like, okay, maybe there is value here.
Maybe you're on to something.
Yeah, thank you.
For sure.
You call it.
Right there, I'm on our way this way.
I was gonna say, like when you were saying that when you were younger, you'd meet with your parents and you'd do that goal setting thing and goals.
Yeah, family summit.
And a question was, how important of a role do you think your father played in your life? And what do you think your life would look like if you never had a father? Because when I was a kid, my father died when I was 9, right?
Wow.
And he died of Lou Gehrig's disease. And I'm only 46, and my father would actually be 111 right now, because he was born in 1906 and he had me when he was 65 years old. So he actually went to war in 1939 when he was 33 years old. So it's kind of unique that way with the age thing. So, but I always kind of felt like I got robbed. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I was always envious of my friends that had parents, you know, and it's, you know, so how important was it to have a father like that? Because you seem like you had really good parents.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's priceless, right? Like I have no idea what my life would look like if I didn't have either of my parents. My parents and probably Tash now are the only people who can literally make me cry in like 2 words, because of like underneath those 2 words or 3 words, like Tyrell, we love you, you know, like how simple that is. And I'm saying that because I had all these calls where that was the only thing that they would say, or that's what they would lead with, and the conversation was over and I was a wreck. There is like so much depth under that, right? Like, and so I have no idea how to answer that question other than I certainly would not be here, right? Like I don't know what life would have looked like, because in those hardest, like my life in some ways was informed, meaning I knew some of these things intuitively by the time I was 12 or 13 because of this accelerated path. And my parents were the only people who had any concept that they could help guide me, in at least set up the goalposts, right? And like help me just like one day at a time, like that trip down to Philadelphia. If they weren't there, I wouldn't have been in Philadelphia. I certainly would have come home, you know, like so. by the time that my life was kind of put together and this framework in its first inception was there, they were the only people in my tribe. That was my tribe. So it's a hard question, and I appreciate you asking it. What? Yeah.
Although, can I say something to that?
Yeah.
I think that important thing to remember though is that we get all of our forming, all of our patterning, all of the life lessons that stay with you for your whole life by the time you're about 8. So in a way, the way I think of it sometimes is that even though life changes, you get the dominant patterns that you're living your whole life with, like the lessons, the support, all that stuff before you're 8, and that's in there. And that's something too, in terms of actually strategy and looking at it long term and holistically, it is a consideration. It is to look at the physiology too, the components, and I obviously love this fucking shit too.
So I have 2 questions. Question number 1. When you talk about your wife, I love the way you talk about her, how you get your support from her. I'm wondering though, is this a partnership where you have your dream, or is this a partnership where you have your dream and we're simply not talking about her passion, aside from being a mother?
Yeah.
So is the energy split, or is it really on you?
We had this. No,
I think it's another dynamic.
I'm really grateful for that question, because it brought up a conversation that we had. So we had our 5-year wedding anniversary, and Tash. So short backstory about. I guess probably about 4 or 5 years ago, we started this thing called the Love Book, where we have a book, a journal at any given time, and one of us has it in our possession, and it's essentially the person who has it in their possession's responsibility to write a letter and give it to the other person. And so we've done 4 of these books. We're on our 4th version. So her suggestion, when we were up in Penticton, we squeezed away for a weekend. She was like, we should write down the highs and the lows over the last 5 years. Of our relationship, of ourselves. And so that spurred this conversation of some, I think, really important acknowledgements, right, of being a mom and essentially keeping your children alive and thriving in their first years, right, of breastfeeding and that is very robbing of some of those other things that, that I think women, and certainly Tash, want to aspire to do. So that was something that came out of that. And on the flip side of that, I think, so Tash is an gymnast and a national level gymnast and a national level rugby player, and she's kind of a CrossFit addict as well. So I keep nudging her to try and go to the CrossFit Games. I think that would be I think she could do it. And that I can, just in the last 6 months or 7 months, I've seen some of those lights start to turn back on. So for example, she planted 2,500 rhubarb plants about six months ago. So she basically started a farm, and she's going to harvest about 30 or 40,000 pounds of rhubarb by herself. So she goes to the farm 2 times a day. Her parents own this farm, so the land's there. She irrigates it, weeds, everything. It's a single woman operation. And the reason why I went down this path of having this conversation, the subtle swagger, right? And one of her comments was, I don't care if people say that I or we shouldn't be able to do this. I want to have a rhubarb farm, and I want, she has, she says, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to be an athlete. And I was like, okay, we'll figure it out. That's part of our journey together. That excites me so much more than if she was a person, which there's not a gene or a cell in her body that is this way, to just say, I am happy to be here, be a wife, be a mom, support you. That is not our relationship, which makes it exponentially harder. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But man, that subtle swagger is so fun to just see and appreciate. Yeah. So yeah, there's a big story there.
Not to minimize motherhood, I see the 2 of you contributing to the family in your own way, and then you have this big thing happening. Yeah. Does she have a big thing happening? And at this point, she's got her rhubarb farm with her 2,500 plants.
Yeah, And it's
That's what she wants.
yeah, and it's crazy because like
That's crazy.
It's so, yeah. For now it is, and it's funny, right? Because it's so much more work, right? It's so much more work for her. No question. She brings both. The farm's called Obella Farm, so it's because she brings Olia is our oldest daughter, and Bella is our youngest daughter. Because she brings them in her work truck there every day. Yeah. They're like in the weeds and stuff like that. But she has like thrived in that experience despite the challenge. Like she was supposed to. I brag a little bit. She planted like 6 months ago. The regular grow for rhubarb is 2 years for your first yield, your first harvest. And she like went over the top, like irrigating, putting manure on, rototilling, like doing everything, herself, and her dad helps, and I help as well. And she harvested 500 pounds in the last month. Like, so she had a harvest this season 2 years early, which is just, it's so, like, that's thriving to me. That's thriving. So.
Do you guys have like a nanny or a babysitter?
No, so we intentionally moved from, we used to live in Vancouver on Commercial and in Gastown, which was very convenient work-wise. We moved to Langley, Walnut Grove, because her parents are now about 10 minutes away. And so when she goes to the farm twice a day, sometimes they can help and watch. And that's our only childcare is our parents kind of when they do, although all four of our parents are all fully employed. So it's a juggle. Like,
but they can babysit when you guys want to go out, that kind of stuff.
we know we don't go out. we haven't been away together alone since Bella, so that's 5 months. In part because she's breastfeeding and stuff like that. But those are really few and far between. Which admittedly we have to do a better job of. We have to build more intention into that part of our relationship. I think. Yeah.
My second question had to just an explanation for the model of it. So the deep end are the different areas of your life where at some point or another you want to just jump in. And the wall is what you're referring to as you're projecting in the future what could be the problem or what has been what is.
Yeah. So the wall is a present thing to me, like the way that I interpret it. It's something that happens in the present. But the reason why I said projecting out is because I know these things are going to come up. Like I know there's going to be really hard decisions and decisions that are ultimately going to kind of break me before I have to make them in the future. And so I think it's a worthwhile practice to scenario those things out. But so the deep end for me is literally what I want to be in every area of my life. So like if I don't. Work has been one of the most challenging areas to do that because I have a role that fits inside of a box, and then some things in that role I love and I thrive in. But there's a lot of things that I've realized that are outside of that are more associated here and here. That again, I have just taken the liberty to evolve the work that I do in my organization to align with these things. And so that's helped me stay in the context of, build, direct, and adding value there, but also staying in that deep end. If that equation were to change, if someone were to say tomorrow, like, here's the box you have to play in, and we don't really want you going outside of it anymore, even if it's adding value to the organization, I would leave. Like, there's no question. I would struggle with it, but because that is an area of deep end for me. So my goal is to essentially facilitate or architect that into every aspect of my life.
Do you want to tread bottom or touch bottom anywhere? Just for a breather?
I think the breathers, right? The escapes are really important. Yeah, so I agree. Like there's been times where I surf. Like I've surfed for about 20 years or 15 years, and that is an introverted, energy-filling thing. So there's weeks, especially before Bella came, where I would leave on a Friday night at 9 o'clock, either drive to Tofino where my brother lives, or just go over to Victoria. Get up at 4 a.m., surf for 4 hours up outside of Victoria, and then take the ferry at like 12 o'clock home as like that escape from the deep end. So figuring out where your sanctuaries are, your churches are, like surfing for me is one of them.
So do you have some time on the weekend too?
Yeah, weekends are. So I read a really interesting thing by. There's a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is kind of VC, like venture capital folks. But one of the things that this guy said that was really interesting was he like is a huge like A type workaholic, works really hard, is one of the most successful people in Silicon Valley, and his comment about weekends was like, I go home and I usually sleep like 15 to 17 hours each day on the weekend. Like it is a full, and I feel like I've kind of moved towards that space. So yeah, I train either once or twice a day on Saturday and maybe once a technical session on Sunday. But otherwise it's like locked down. Like Tash, more or less, the goal is that she can do whatever she wants. So like this morning she got up and went to Vancouver and did CrossFit with all of her old friends and kind of spent 5 hours out of the house. But otherwise it's like as much as I can, I need to take care of
with the kids.
Yeah, and just sleep and just like rest and like recover essentially. Yeah. Which, I mean, there's lots of times where I think I'd love to be doing other things, but it's just not. It's not a hell yes, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to thank you because one of the biggest, for me, my struggle has been to allow myself to go in the deep end. I was been struggling with the high five, staying in the high dive most of my life. So what I found really interesting is that you really mapped out what helped me sort of be in the deep end now, which was my tribe, which was missing, and understanding my wall and what would come up or what I need to understand or my fears in order to be able to stay there. So so that's been just so visual, it's so awesome. And it's also almost like helping, I think that could help people really understand how to dive into the deep end without being scared so much.
It's so scary. I think that's the thing that we all I found that everybody shares is those voices in your head.
Yes.
Right. Everybody has those things, and I think that's so cool. Like that we all.
Like I don't know enough.
Yeah.
I don't have enough certificates.
Yeah.
And the list goes on and on.
Yeah. Like it's amazing that we all share that, right? Those, like, I call them the gremlins, right? They're in these deep corners of your mind. And if you don't have some of these things in place, they can, when the next question comes, I'll read a little excerpt that I wrote driving here, because I kind of got into an interesting headspace. But it's exactly that. Like if you don't know how to deal with those detractors that are survival instincts, right? The gremlins are the things that are saying, no, you are safer in this box because we're built to survive as human beings, like in history.
Don't die, we get
Yeah, exactly. Like, so it's a natural mechanism, but you can override that, right? And we don't live in a world where we have to listen to the kind of the reptilian brain, like side telling, saying stay safe, survive. So I love that everybody shares that, right? Like you can talk to any single person and they're like, yes, I know what you're talking about. If you can get down to that intimate of a conversation, yeah.
So how do you deal with those thoughts coming in? Then like how because if you're driving somewhere, like my wife's at home, and like how do you deal with all these thoughts that come?
Yeah, so I mean, so meditation has been a huge one over the last couple of years. I've journaled since I've been 9 years old, and so I journal daily. And I've added, so one thing that's been really interesting is I commute a lot. So there's times where I'm commuting 4 hours a day. Just in between, like every day I'm either doing Walnut Grove, Richmond, Vancouver, Richmond, Walnut Grove. And then some days I'm just going Langley or Walnut Grove, Vancouver, Richmond, doing that triangle. And what I've realized, I mean, so obviously the first thing that anyone says when I say that is like, are you crazy? Yeah, like, don't you hate driving? Like, you must hate it. Like, how's a commute? Like, I get those questions every single day. And I don't really get into like the nerdy response, but what I've realized is that it is actually a forced recovery window. So think about the amount of times in your day, especially if you don't have to commute, you don't have to be driving, where you can essentially not pay attention to this. You can't be checking Facebook, or like it's not very safe, obviously. Although it happens. You like can't be doing anything except like reading a book, listening to a book, thinking, listening. I've listened to a lot, thinking or listening to music. Like that's kind of all you can do. And so I've really appreciated this. The trend that started to emerge, and so what I did was I started using Evernote and voice to text. So I'll start my phone when I start driving, whenever I get a thought, and I'll just talk, and it'll translate all of it in a note.
And it works well?
Yeah, it works amazingly well. Well, we'll see. I'll read what I wrote, and then we'll see how it did. But my most interesting thinking comes on my last leg of driving after a throwing session, a technical session, and a strength session. Then at 7:30 or 7:45, I drive back home, and that is like the moment where, because I'm forced to be cognitive enough, there's some research that looks at walking and why walking is so functional for solving problems, right? So like we know like conscious brain, subconscious, and when you shift those two, that's where like the like answers just come to you. The reason is because walking is cognitive enough that you have to pay just enough attention that your brain is moving, but not so much that like your subconscious basically starts attacking all of the things that are going on in your conscious brain. So driving I found is really similar. And so as I'm driving home, I just have these like revelations come. Yeah, exactly, like the aha moments. At least they're aha moments for me, and or like, you know, they're the answers to a lot of those tough conversations that are going on in my head. So I try and get those out, like get them out of me. So that's been a really cool kind of observation.
You kind of are able to connect to yourself. Like,
yeah, it's a form of meditation, I think. Yeah.
I think during the daytime when I'm working, the same thing happens with me. Because I work with clients and have challenges coming up every day with my interior design business. So you can shove those challenges and say I don't want it, but it's there, and it's you who's going to solve it. It's not nobody else who's going to come and solve it. So say I'm working on something and something just comes up, and I just leave everything right there, and I say I need to get this going, get to solve this problem, but the solution is not coming just like that, sitting on my desk. So the best thing, like you said, I put on my running shoes and I go for a walk.
Yes.
By the time I go half loop, I'm like, bingo.
That's awesome. It's so cool.
Come back, get off. Yes, I got it. So
It's so
I think
cool.
that connection really helps, and the way you're sharing it, I can connect with that.
Yeah,
element.
that's amazing.
Well, yeah.
I love it. Yeah, the aha moments. That's exactly it.
Yeah, walking does help, I think.
Yeah.
Jessica? Yeah, no, I just, again, I wanted to really thank you for the way that you've laid this all out and the awareness that it creates. And the one thing that really stood out to me, because I'm on this journey, I'm trying to live as much as I can in the deep end right now, and I'm loving it. But what's coming from it is as you hit those walls and you find your tribe and you do that circle, it's the person that you're becoming in the process that I'm falling in love with more and more, right? It keeps encouraging you to keep going in that circle, right?
Yeah.
I love it. But the way that you've drawn it out like that, I'm very visual, so this is, to me, just brilliant. So I just want to thank you for this.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. It's a conversation, right? That's my favorite thing about these, is because it's just a conversation.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of, what are your tips for creating a really solid, amazing tribe? Because I mean, you have your parents, and I mean, not everyone has parents, of course. I mean, my parents are amazing, I love them so much, but we didn't have this kind of feel that you had, right? So like, I still feel like I am building a wonderful, and I know wonderful people, but like, what are some things that you would, what are some good things, some tips?
Yeah.
A solid tribe.
I mean, the first thing I'd say is it can be incredibly small, right? Like it can really be a closed circle, so to speak. And so what I've realized is that like in this journey, in this tribe in my life, there's really two people, Garrett, my coach, and Tash. Like those are the only two people that I'll defer to, and they know me. Like the relation, so a little bit of backstory to Garrett, which is important. So I threw discus in high school when I was, and I hated it. Like my parents, I remember sitting at my table, telling my parents I wanted to quit, and then being like, no, you're throwing discus. This is when I was in grade 7 and grade 8. And it's a good thing that I did, and we kind of negotiated that I would throw like 2 months of the year in the basketball off season, and then I'd go back to basketball, because every minute that I wasn't playing basketball was like sabotaging my Division I dream. So I ended up winning a couple of national championships when I was in grade 10, 11, and 12, and my coach at the time was Garrett's father. And so when I left to go play basketball, Richard, basically in our last time seeing him, he was not thrilled that I was going to play basketball, given the talent that I had basically thrown away over my high school career that he saw.
Pun intended, eh?
Yeah. They're Hawaiian, so he kind of came to me and he was like, you know, Tyrell, like, if you ever want to do something really special, like if you ever want to be really good at something, let me know when you're done with that other silly sport, and we'll go to the Olympics together. That was what he said. And so time went on, and 10 years later, I reached out to both of them, both Garrett and Richard, who was older, and said, I'm ready to go on this journey. And Garrett was just coming back from coaching, being the throws coach at the University of Hawaii, to live in BC. And so he basically picked up those reins that Richard started, and then Richard, a year after, passed away. So now it's like essentially Garrett and me that are on this trip, and we both understand the depth of it.
And he knows you very well.
He knows me very well now, because he didn't know me. Richard knew me really well, and I knew of Garrett, but we've gotten to know each other. But he knows me so well now, to the point where like I get super hard on myself. So if I have a bad day at practice, like my body language halfway through the day changes, and so Garrett will come. Like he's a good enough coach, like he's a brilliant coach, and that he'll come over and he'll make some like just cheeky remark, like I don't know, he'll say something that like totally throws me off, and it snaps me out of that, like,
You gotta wake up.
I'm like, oh, okay, like I don't, like, yeah, you kind of like can pull me out of those ruts that I get into, which is just common of my personality and my kind of drive. But that's it. There's no one else in that inner circle. There's no one else that I would ever go to and talk to about should I go or not should I go.
And he's
like,
there for you every day. Like he coaches you every day.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. And then Tash is an obvious one, but like when I first reached out to Richard and Garrett, I sent them an email and basically said, let's go. Like, I want to take you guys out for dinner. I want to talk about this dream of going to 2020. If you guys don't think I can do it, if you think this is crazy, or you don't want to come along, tell me right now, and let's not even go out for dinner. Like, it's not even worth starting the conversation. I don't want anything less, and I don't want you guys to expect anything less either. So that basically was the explicit setting of expectations of what our tribal kind of relationship would be. And so I think you need that level of understanding and like commitment with the people that you're inviting into that space. Like, there are people, my other coaches, for example, that are one layer abstracted from that and will pretty much do absolutely anything to support me and have, like even Georgie, you're a great example of one of those people that I'm just like overwhelmed with the amount of support that I don't even know I have, right? That you're there. But there's still a difference, right? Like there's still, so I think being really clear about that, and it's okay to be clear, like.
You mean like actually have a talk about it? Like.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Like that first, I mean, for me, like if I would have, part of this process is accelerating all of the key points, right? So for example, like you don't want to jump into the deep end and like be swimming for your life, chasing after something that you're super excited about, thinking that you have a tribe there to support you, but then 6 months or a year or 2 years later realizing, oh man, that's actually not the case.
Happen.
Yeah, exactly. So the more that you can accelerate, and really like it's a tough conversation, like for me to say, hey guys, like this is what I want to do. You can basically tell me, no, you can't do it. You're the people that I trust the most in the world to tell me that. I would rather you cause me the pain of saying we don't believe you can do it than saying, yeah, we'll support you, and then that changing halfway down the road. It's like getting to those breaking points. Like when I set my goals for my first training season, my only goal, it's funny actually, my only goal for my first year of training of like 2015, 2016 season was run as fast and as hard and hit that wall as hard as possible. Hit the first wall, right? In winter, hit the first wall, because that will give you the indicator of if you're tough enough to go through with this, right? And I knew at some point in the winter season, I'd be like, okay, this is enough. Like we show up and it's raining and dark and snowing and ice for like, weeks and weeks at a time. I just wanted to get to that point where I was like, I'm fed up with this, I can't do it, and see what happens. Do that as fast as possible so that if you're really not cut out for it and your tribe isn't there, or one of the dynamics isn't there, you get off that path as kind of quickly as you can. Sorry, I didn't totally answer your question, but
yeah, I think
in a roundabout way.
I don't need to have like 10 people, right? It could be.
I wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, and open communication and have an actual talk with them.
Yeah, because there's an amount of like there's a depth in those relationships that you can't divide amongst 10 people, for example, right? Like you really those things really go deep. Because when you're like coming to that person, like when I go to Garrett and I'm like, man, like, can I do this, right? Like, am I falling behind, or like, do you think I can do this? And I'm basically asking him like, should I give up? you know, like there are not a lot of people I would want to be that vulnerable and have that conversation with, and hold enough, build enough trust in, like investment into the relationship. I just don't think we have enough capacity to do that amongst a whole bunch of people.
I think that's so true. Like, if I may add, one of the biggest things that for me that helped me like really dive was that there's moments where like I burned out, like I completely fell apart, and I'm single, 2 boys, I'm homeschooling, starting that business, and I was like, okay, I don't think I can do it. And then these 2 people in my tribe were the only one that pull me out and say, well, you don't have, it's a non-negotiable. You have to do it. So they're the ones who were there to support me, to get me out of, well, I have to quit right now because I don't have the drive. And so these are the people that you want in that tribe, that you know, because you know when it's said, when you don't have a choice to be the person you have to be, whether it's being an athlete or me like doing my business, it's so deep inside, but there's moments where it's like, oh my God, there's so much I can do it. Well, these people are the ones that will help you move past that so that you can go back and not realize 5 years later, oh shit, I should not have quit. You know, like, yeah. So, and that's what, 3 people in my tribe. Cool. Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a tough question because I competed at the Olympic trials in '96 and 2000. Sometimes we don't set our goals high enough. So is your goal, I'm gonna put you on the spot, to go to the Olympics in 2020 or win a gold medal in 2020? If you go too low, you may not reach it.
Yeah,
That's a tough question.
that's
I'm not asking for the answer, but
that's a tough question.
something you have to internally think about and put down on paper.
Yeah. So what you'll see, and I won't answer it because I think it doesn't. I think it's a question that shouldn't be answered necessarily right now. So if you go to that Patreon page, which Georgie forcefully encouraged me to create, and I'm so thankful you did. Today,
On the back of your cards.
Yeah, what essentially all that I'm referring to is on there. I put a little graphic, and I've done this at a couple of my events when I'm exposing people to like, what am I doing? What is this journey about? What you'll see is that I started this journey in April, May, competing of 2016. So it's about a year and a half ago. I threw 43 meters in my first meet. In my last meet of this year, I threw 53. To qualify for the Olympics in June of 2020, I'll have to throw 65. It's a big gap. The bronze medal at 2012 was 67.85. And all of those markers are on that progress report. And I don't know to ask your, like I honestly don't know, but the idea of like, I think I share your line of thought in that if you're gonna like invest 6 years and you're gonna get that close, like if you qualify for the Olympics, you're within 1.5 meters of a medal, 2 meters. You might as well.
More than I can throw, so you can go for it.
Exactly, you might as well go for it. The more interesting question for me, or the equally interesting, is if you qualify for the Olympics and you do decently well, like you come in the top 5, or the top 6, can you not go to 2024, right? Can you not train for another 4 years, given that you're so young? And all of these things are massive long shots, right? Like I think it's worth noting the amount of ground that I'm going to have to cover just to hit qualifying. But like there's not, it's really, strength isn't, like, so getting a little bit into the weeds, strength isn't an issue for me. Like I've kind of, CrossFit built a really good bridge for me to get into discus. It's all technical, right? So like the fact that I have a visualization and kind of mindfulness coach is to like help me make up all those gaps of technical progression, because the only difference between me throwing 60 and 67 are technical changes to my throw, which just makes it a little bit of the rate of change is more variable, but there's an upside to that in that it can be more exponential. Yeah, so I love the thought is there, trust me. Yeah.
I read something the other day that goes with exactly what you're talking about right now. It said, if you think you can or you think you can't, either way you're right.
Yep.
You know, and it just kind of really hit me, you know, like it's, if you think you can't do it, then you're probably not going to be able to do it.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I think you can.
Yeah, thank you.
Matters
Thank you.
more which line of thought you're gonna pick up. if you say can't, more can't comes to your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you say can, more can comes to your life. And I believe in that.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad, speaking of, like, drilled that into me when I was a kid, and I never thought twice about it, right? Never, he was like, whenever I said I can't, he would like scold me. You can't say I can't. Like, you don't say I can't. But I've realized, because Olia has just started saying I can't when she doesn't want to do something, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm like, you don't say I can't. You can say no thank you, or you can say nothing. Like, because I truly believe it. Like, it, yeah. So it's full circle for me in some interesting ways. Yeah.
So you are an athlete representing Canada, is the goal.
Yeah.
And you're training and you're competing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm hearing. Is
Yeah.
Is your country supporting you financially?
No.
That's why we're here,
So-
people.
So this is what I don't understand is how, because our governments, levels of government support athletes. What do you have to do in order to get financial support to achieve your dream?
So it's unfortunately a fairly complex conversation and quite subjective, as I'm sure you know. So like the fact that I'm older, right, is kind of a subjective mark against me. The fact that I'm in a field event is in terms of Athletics Canada's strategy, they're not necessarily focused on field events over other events. So they'll
Team events is what they want?
no, like a run, like right now, yeah, exactly. Like Athletics Canada's focus is in running events and middle distance running events. So they will actually shift financial compensation and even who they select for teams based on where they want to essentially place their investment. So yeah, like I think, to be honest, the path for me, so any national championships that I go to, world championships, if you qualify for those teams and are selected, so like for example, this last year, I qualified for the Francophone World Games, which were in the Ivory Coast. So Team Canada released a standard. I surpassed the standard. Wasn't selected for the team because they chose more running athletes. I would have ended up coming second at that meet at the World Championships, but that's a subjective. I mean, it's not fully subjective, but that's kind of how the dice roll. So my path to financial sponsorship of not only our families and our lives, but also training, which I think is like averaging between 20 and 30,000 a year for this year, is through stuff like this, like speaking at like formal speaking events, like that video that some of you saw, fundraising events. Eventually, I'm going to need to figure out my kind of corporate sponsorship strategy. And then there's things like the Petro-Canada sponsorship programs, and RBC has like an Olympic sponsor program. So going down those paths as I start to, like in the next year, I'll start to kind of move into the world stage levels of competition. None of which are really through being a Canadian funded athlete, because I mean, that frankly, it just doesn't really exist for.
So you have to get yourself to a point where they say, hey, wait a minute, this guy is on the stage, then they start supporting you, but you have to get yourself in front of them.
Then it's so then I can apply to be supported, and then, to be honest, I have no idea how those decisions are made afterwards, because all I know is that there are significantly more athletes that are at those types of funding standards that are not being funded versus the ones that are, just because of the amount of total funds that the government and Athletics Canada has to provide, right? Like, we just don't fund athletes like countries like the US or Asian countries do.
Can you fund yourself into the Olympics?
That's a question that I'll answer in the next 2 or 3 years. Like,
have athletes funded themselves into the Olympics in the past?
Yeah.
So they're on their own tab?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Lots of Canadian athletes. I mean, not as many American athletes, but you still have. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So I mean, it gets in the complexities, but again, like for example, if you qualify for the Olympics or if you qualify for a World Games, had I been selected for the Francophone Games, that all is funded, right? So Team Canada national team trip is paid for, but training, stipend, monthly, any of that kind of stuff is more of a rarity, I'd say.
Yeah, and that's very true. Like, for example, with trampoline, with my son's a national athlete now, we have an athlete that's, her name is Tamara, and she goes to World Games. She was first in the World Games, and that's like, it's really high standard. And trampoline, we had a gold medal in trampoline, right? We still had to support her, and she had to support herself. And we're the one who paid for our coaches to go. And her journey has been to fundraise, and because she's working as well, and it just, yeah.
That's why
Canada is so different than the US in that way.
But may I just add that I'm really I argue both sides of the fence, because people who dream to be doctors, lawyers, merchant, whatever you want, have to pay their way through university, right? You and others, your dream is to be a successful athlete.
Yep.
So part of me says, why would an athlete get funding where people end up graduating from university, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? So I don't think it's really a cut and dry discussion either.
And then my side to that is, but once they're there though, we're saying, oh yay, look at my athlete. He's representing all of Canada, but he had to do his journey all by himself.
Yes.
So that's, for me, it's like the counter to that, right?
Then there's the next level when the successful athletes get endorsements, and it's a snowball effect. Whereas these people have to pay back their student loans, and the athletes don't have to pay back. So I think it's a really complex issue, and that's not really what we're here for today. I was curious what your journey
I think
was.
it's a really good point, because we get to choose where our money goes. And one of the reasons I'm so passionately behind Tyrell is because of the human being he is. And so if we get behind someone like this, right, because we're spending money all day, every day on all different kinds of things, right? So if someone like Tyrell, if we help him, we get to be a part of that, and I think that's freaking awesome. But the other thing is, if he hits that point and he gets big endorsement deals, what he will do with that money and with that platform will change the world. And that's why I'm so incredibly passionate behind you. And And that's why I think we all have that choice, right? And it's not often, I think, that we get to have conversations with someone like him where we get to really get into his head, where he's so open and he's so, this is who he is. And I've been watching him from, like I say, the first time I saw you at Jonathan's thing, which, like you say, was probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was for sure.
Waiting till I had a platform where I could talk more with him, and then he came the first time. So I've been, with every cell of who I am, I know 100% I can confidently say, well, you all know that because I probably told you all outside of this about, how amazing he is. But it's not just because I think it's amazing, it's because I think of what he has the potential to do. And I think if we don't stand up and get behind things that we really believe, which I think are all the things he stands for, someone who's so clear, who's so true, who knows exactly what really matters in the world, then who's going to, right? And through the power of just us in this room, we can do so much. And I just think we have a person that we can support to do that, which is why I'm just so. And I hope there's millions of people on internet land watching, but it's like, come on, people.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, well, because I think you demonstrate that with everything that you do, and I'm not even sure you really know that. And because for me, I'm so curious about people and how people do what they do, which is, I think, why one of the reasons I'm so fascinated with you, because I've seen it so steady with how you do things. So I find it very interesting, and I'm curious, but also that you don't waver.
And the thing is, this benefits people, not only athletes, like we said, everybody can benefit from that, like Jessica said as well. So yay.
Yeah, that's the point. I mean, for me, that's the point, right? Is because who we are transcends what we do. right? So like the things that we do inform kind of how we evolve as human beings, but they don't define, like, I don't believe they don't define our path, right? Like the learning, like if I've learned anything in life, it's that you use vehicles in your life, things that you do to learn things and then transcend those learnings over to kind of the bigger, broader, longer term picture of your life, right? So the fact that this isn't about a sport or an athlete or a career or a job or a movement, that's like, I mean, for me, that's really important because otherwise it wouldn't be worth talking about.
I think it would be really cool to have your parents come to one of these.
Oh, I know.
have so many questions.
I think it would be cool to have your parents and Tash and you.
Yeah, that would be
I think
Yeah,
that would
that
be
would
an
be cool.
amazing conversation.
That would be cool.
Like, really cool.
My last comment on the financial side, it's hugely important. There's no question about that. And, you know, like our lives are set up in a very non-optimized way for like enjoyment or balance because I have to, you know, commit to working and surviving for our family and all that. And I also have to train. However, it is not the deal breaker. And so your question of can someone fund themselves to the Olympics, I think my belief is the answer is absolutely yes. Just because for example, the thought that comes up for me is there was a point this year, and I'm not bragging. I'm not trying to brag, or I don't know what bucket this falls into. I had to. It's
the rights too that you should.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's a little bit self-conscious, just in that we realized at a point that the commuting to work and to Langley, like, it's just not sustainable. Like, I can't afford to do that. So there was a point, like about a 3 or 4 month period, where I would get up, you know, at 5 or about a half hour earlier, or leave the house even closer to 5 and drive to Richmond, because then I would miss the toll and I could park for free in like that sketchy parking lot underneath the, and then I would take the Canada line from there into Vancouver. And then, so that was about a 2-hour commute, or just under, hour and 45 minutes. And then I could Canada line back out to Richmond, train in Richmond, and then drive home from Richmond. So it ended up saving us like $200 a month or $150 a month. And those, like, that to me was an okay compromise to make to continue my journey to the Olympics and not let the financial piece be the deal breaker. So I just think that there's a lot of other pieces that I'm glad that I have in place other than that one, which frankly it is not in place. And you know, that's my challenge to solve. And
Do you have somebody like organizing all your fundraising things, or do you?
No. Yeah, it's all, yeah. So like this last fundraiser that I did, which was like absolutely incredible, and I wouldn't have shared this tonight if I hadn't been able to share it there. I essentially I emailed about 500 people, because about 2 weeks before the fundraiser, I kind of realized that I was under the impression that other people were going to drive pieces of that, and then I kind of realized, no, you got to do, like, between the committee of us that were organizing it and leading the event, we basically had this make or break point. I was like, I had this conversation with myself. Either I have to go and do this all by myself, or I have to pull the kind of the plug on it, because otherwise it's not going to be successful. So I made that decision to just go all in, and I literally emailed about 500 people, sold about 80 tickets, and you know, facilitated the whole evening. That's what a regular fundraising event looks like, and it was an incredible learning experience. But the input, like the energy input to financial return, probably wasn't worth it. You know, like.
Yeah, so is there, like, if this website has like how much money he's already made?
No, wait, this is just set up. So
Yeah, so I just set this up. If you want to see those details, I have that on a page on my site, which is just my name, tyrellmara.com/Olympics. And that's also another way to, this Patreon page, yeah, I recommend taking a look at it, and it's in like an ongoing kind of journey type donation. And then what I've tried to do over time is crowdsource some funds just through my own website, which is just like people giving one time, and then being a part of like my email list and just being a part of the journey. Yeah, but I've not found a good solution for doing it in a meaningful and scalable way.
Yeah, it'd be cool if you can make events like for younger people, like where they can
Yeah.
get mentorship from you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, my kids would come.
Yeah, like I've gone in and taught and facilitated a few sessions at a couple of schools, which has been like incredible, so fun. And I've spent so much time, 15 years of coaching basketball and strength and conditioning. Like I've spent so much time with youth that I just like. I was telling someone the other day, it took me an hour and a half of kind of craftfully facilitating a space where these kids, they're grade 11 and 12 boys, about 60 or so of them, were comfortable actually talking about the things that they were thinking about, right? Actually going to the places where they were vulnerable. And so I just remember like this beautiful moment, which is what I love. Like this is my space that I love being in. Finally feeling like I could go there a little bit. So we were in this huge auditorium and I just stopped the conversation. I was like, guys, like what scares you? And I just kind of threw it out there. And when you actually get in that space, the things that people say, like I don't think I can live up to my parents' expectations. I'm afraid of, someone in my family, like losing someone, dying, like all these really vulnerable, meaningful, like visceral things. Those are the spaces that I love to play in. And I think youth and kids, and teenagers and athletes are a good place to do that.
Tyrell, I was thinking about your deep end model and the news lately where there was a single dad with 5 kids that he had carefully trained to take the bus to school and he got nailed by social services.
Yeah.
And I just thought if you could offer this to parents, and when I was listening to the radio, most of the parents are going, yeah, it's stupid, it's ridiculous, and obviously he was a caring and attentive parent, not neglecting them and not putting them at risk. But there's this whole mentality of coddling children. I mean, I flew to the Dominican Republic and back when I was 15 alone. My parents let me do that. Their friends were crazy.
Awesome.
Right? But you can't build the confidence without taking those leaps of faith and preparing for them and doing them. So that was just one of the things that struck me.
Products that you can sell.
This whole driving kids to school, and then the statistics are more kids are injured in vehicles. Than walking to and from school. Or busing to and from school, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
I mean,
I'm
all for the calculated risk or the leap of faith.
Yeah, the calculated exposures.
Yeah.
Right, those exposures that we have in our lives.
I'll be interested to see what deep ends you throw your own kids into.
I'm excited.
What kind of dad are you?
Interesting question. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I love having girls. Like I always wanted to have girls, and so I love that. I come from a family of 3 boys, so I have no clue as to what being around girls and raising girls is like. And I know it's going to be a total roller coaster, but I absolutely love it. I think the way it'll play out, I feel like, is going to be that what I can kind of see is that Tash is much more even keel, like more strict, more of the time. Also probably as a function of not being as good of a dad as Tash is as a mother in terms of just being around, right, being present. I think that will influence that behavior, I'm guessing. Yeah.
I find it so interesting because the first time you came, Tash was pregnant with the first one.
With number 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And everyone was telling you, oh, you can't have this baby and do all these things. And then it's just amazing of where you are now with 2, right?
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like lots of us, right? Like there's
for sure.
There's no.
It's always interesting, right?
Yeah.
What do you think your purpose is?
I mean, to be honest, I think it's to do stuff like this, to hold this space for. I really think it comes back to this.
And for what reason? I'm a purpose freak, so.
Yeah, I know. You asked me this last time, and I feel like I really struggled with it.
You did, but that's why I'm curious.
Like This is all I care about.
Yeah,
you know, if I'm going to be honest, like I really just care about having, for people who want to have those conversations, like how can you be showing up a little bit more, or be like living at a little bit of a higher level of like fulfillment intrinsically. I love the idea of like, so one of the concepts, one of the things that I've thought in the back of my head that fits on that graph is this concept of 10,000 leaders. Like, could you have a positive impact on 10,000 leaders over the course of your lifetime? And I just love team. I think maybe similar to you, because I love people. Like, I think because of my kind of eclectic grouping of experiences, what I've observed is that I have a really good understanding of ego, and ego in like relationship to groups.
Yeah.
And so, again, as much as I don't want to admit it or say it, I could probably do none of the work that I'm doing at a professional level and just do team facilitation, strategic planning, and team building, and really add a ton of value, which is, you know, probably the dive in, the high dive that I'm on right now is, what does that evolution look like over the next 3 years, right? Because I know at a certain point I'm going to be needing to do less of corporate, build direct, senior leadership, product management stuff, and more of, you know, doing that with more groups of people explicitly.
I think your contribution with the youth who are like similar to her kids. I have. It doesn't have to be in sports all the time.
No, yeah.
My daughter is a emerging singer, songwriter. My son is 22, and you know he has his goals. So I think overall with the youth, if you work with the youth with your drive, and you being quite being young, they would look at you as a role model, and that will spiral their future.
Yeah.
And that's going to be very, very, very valuable for our society, for the country as such, I think.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
an athlete like you, like telling younger people that journaling is a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, it's a huge thing,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's
Yeah, that's how I survived. Like,
awesome.
yeah.
And I think it's gonna be really awesome for my little one, because he's really emotional, and he's really passionate, and I think that goes with also being super driven to the point that he drives me insane. Right? Because like, and in order to be also an elite in whatever you're doing, you have to have certain qualities, and not everybody has them, and that's okay, right? We're all different. And then for me, understanding Lucas and what he needs in order to thrive, he has to have his schedule, and I can't deviate, because holy cow, the world's gonna end. And it's not towards me, it's gonna be towards himself. He didn't do enough, you should have been doing this, you should have been outside straightening hockey, or whatever it is. If I don't do that and support him, he doesn't get there, right? But learning that, yes, you cried when you were young is amazing for him.
Yeah.
Because that was the first 3 years of hockey. It was me in the car with him crying all the way home.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh my God.
Shanann had a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Well, before I ask my question, I really want to highlight your wife. I think that it's a super privilege to have somebody like that.
No, yeah.
Especially in a romantic relationship, to have somebody support you in an intimate romantic relationship, where most of us just get into relationships like that so we can enjoy the damn relationship. Right?
Oh, there's that part of it. I don't know. Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
So I really want to acknowledge that.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that.
And congratulations to you to actually do whatever it's taking for you to get to where you want to be, and not letting things stop you and finding your way through all these obstacles. That's huge too. And my question really is about the end line of the green graph that you put up there. So it says 1 million help, right? And PM before that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering where that came from. So I'm curious about like how that was born. Is that born through just something that you want to do something impossible, like you've continued to do, right? Some people, that's their drive. I know a lot of people just go, okay, I'm just going to get an impossible goal and go for it. Yeah. Or is it born out of something personal? Is it something to do with maybe part of your history? Where do those two come from?
So I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. Like, so if I look at purpose, for me, like purpose at the end of the day is positive impact and influence on people. Like that's essentially all I care about, and it shows up in a lot of different ways. So both of those end game goals or impossible dreams are doing that in my mind. And they may be the wrong, like, you know, I may be using absolutely 100% the wrong lens to do that, but that's the story I'm telling myself, right? That leading a country or feeding 1 million or 1 billion people, or, you know, helping are vehicles to my greatest positive impact and influence. Today, those are like North Stars that I kind of want to keep guiding myself towards. And like, I have absolutely no, like, those are just words, essentially. Like, I don't know what the path is. I don't know what the next 30 years of my life needs to look like to kind of navigate to get there, one or the other. But I'm pretty sure that's the general vicinity of direction that I want to move in. And like, yeah, I've had enough exposures to coaching kids, helping kids, working with less fortunate. Like, I launched our Giving Back program at Build Direct. I just said, out of the hypothesis that at our company, because it's a lot of younger people, we don't have a lot of money, but we have time. So how do we give time, right? Like the ability to have positive impact and influence, the barrier to entry is so low. So that kind of speaks to the how do you help mass amounts of people? That's just the direction that I want my life to go in. And other than that, I have no, like, I just don't know. I don't know what the steps are, what the path is, if those are the right things, because they very well may not be. But yeah, they're stars, right? They're like in my constellation. I kind of see them out there, and they'll evolve and they'll change. Like, because in my mind, we're talking about 40 years. Yeah. Right. So like 10 years from now, I'm gonna have, you know, a 13-year-old and potentially have 3 kids, and I've gone to the Olympics, hopefully more than once. Yeah, exactly. Like life will look so much different that my constellation may have shifted a little bit, but I'm guessing that if we sit down in 10 years from now, there will be something to the effect of having as much, you know, being able to have a dent in the world from the aspect of influencing people in a positive way. And that's pretty broad.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I work as a coach, and when I got into coaching, I had a business of Tim Hortons before, which I used to own Tim Hortons. Yeah. So when I got into coaching, all I knew was I want to coach, but I didn't know what kind of coaching I want to do. And so I got into helping people, helping franchise owners with my Tim Hortons experience. Yeah. And it's just speaking to what you're saying, you know, those are just words. You just kind of go into that direction and things unfold and unravel. For me, I started to notice how much I hated that right away. Yeah, awesome. I was talking to Mortons all day, right? Yeah. But I was, you know, I slowed down enough to notice that it wasn't coaching I hated. It was the kind of coaching. Environment, yeah. And now it's evolved to a place where I'm helping people with their dreams or talking about the human experience and such and such. So what I'm curious about is like, where is that born from? I know that those are probably going to change for you, and it's a direction, and it will unfold how it is, and maybe you'll become a president of a different country. Yeah. But where's it born from? Is it born from like fulfillment, the path to fulfillment?
Yeah, I mean, I think so part of me doesn't know, you know. I think like I just this is who I am, but I also know that light bulb moment that I had when I was in grade 7, where it was a really pivotal one for me, like where I saw it was like the dichotomy of how the paths that you can choose to live your life. One is grow up like a bully, and this is how you're going to make people feel because you feel like it right now. You have equally as much opportunity and choice to totally flip that on its head and have equally a large amount of positive influence. And I saw that, like I was, like I had experiences where I realized that just smiling at someone, like someone who, you know, like now I would call them at risk. It's like friends that were at risk, right? That actually can influence someone to not take their life or not. You know, like it is so small and insignificant, but it's so meaningful. And like I had those experiences where I was in that situation. And so I think that, like, that is in me. It'll never get out of me.
I get it.
You know,
like taste of it earlier.
Yeah, and it just like, and that was my taste. Like, and I think the point being is that when we do things that we feel like we're giving back or adding value, right in our brains, we have this dopamine response. So we feel good, right? Where we're trained to like, want that and crave it more because it selfishly feels good to us. So like I know that that's kind of like my dopamine drip, so to speak, is seeing that I can help other people, and doing it in the most like I love this concept of being a silent leader, like the leader that is at the table or working with a team or working with one person, and when they have incredible success, you're never even mentioned. You're not even on the radar, right? Like so that like the fact that it can be so insignificant, I really love. So yeah, I mean that's the best answer I've got for you. I'm sorry.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. But I love what I love about what you shared is just that one little comment of I slowed down. Like that's the game changer right there.
Yeah.
Which is super cool.
Yeah, it's always a game changer for me now.
Yeah.
Always remember to slow down. It's basically.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to leave.
Well, just 'cause
Yeah.
we're 10 o'clock, so I want to be really respectful of everybody's time and everything, because I know this conversation could go on like forever.
The whole night.
Forever. Yes, I will let him read what he wrote in the card, because I know you're all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll read. Let me
Okay. Read what you wrote in the
and then
card. Then I'm gonna.
finish it off.
Yes. That's nice.
I don't have to read this.
No, read it. Read it. Read it.
Okay.
Do you want it? Do you want it?
Yeah, read it.
There may be a lot of spelling mistakes, but it kind of went back to a question, Helena, that you asked on like how do you deal with those thoughts? Okay, so this is for me the value of the Human Performance Lab, because I'm really trying to figure out how to talk about this thing. To go anywhere meaningful in life, you must win a war of attrition. Any mountain, any path you're trying to journey, any meaningful adventure. In order to do this, some foundational pieces must be in place. You must know where you're going and why. You must have a dream and chase it. You must honor your mind and give it the space to breathe, grow, and evolve, and that's kind of the slow down piece, and show you the path. Because if you don't, the gremlins hiding in the shadows will tear you to pieces. You must honor your body because it is the facilitator of power and fuel. Don't honor this temple, and you will find yourself riding the slippery slope of diminishing returns all the way to the basement. You must constantly be dialed into your energy. It will propel you to your greatest achievement, or it will suck you to the deepest, darkest of despair. You must be resilient, embracing the opportunity that change provides, not resisting it in a place of fear or insecurity. Those who find capacity and resilience will continue to level up day after day, while those who don't will stay trapped in their shrinking comfort zone, which will be getting smaller inch by inch. This is the Human Performance Lab.
Very awesome.
So that was driving over on the way here. Like that's the impact window. That's like my drive home from work. Anyways, sorry. Thank you for letting me read that.
And if you like, seriously, go to his website, which is on your cards. It is on your cards. His writing is amazing. The whole blog is like that. Like it's so good. So that's step one. Do that. And then I really, 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 really want you guys to consider making a monthly donation to him. I don't care if it's $2, $5, $10, whatever it is that you can do, I think is so important, because I think what he's up to is amazing because of who he is. And I think, we are all spending money at Starbucks or Tim Hortons, or, save that one meal out a month you do, or whatever it is, because that one thing that you save, that you contribute to what he's doing, honestly, I really, 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 really believe can change the world. And then every single person here and in internet land gets to have a piece of that. Like, I just think when we do things that are so much bigger than ourselves, and sometimes that means $5 a month, right? But it makes a difference, and we get to be a piece of that, and we can change the world. And I think you just have what it takes to do that. And so our role in that can be to support that. So I'm really going to just push that. Yeah.
Can I share a couple things just to add to that? I would just, my 3 asks on that piece is, the first one, if there are conversations or questions or things we didn't touch on today, I'd love to hear from you. And whether it's, I would love for anyone that's on Facebook to connect there or via email. If a financial contribution is a possibility. I'd love that, but the first piece is more important, like the connection just to this group ongoing. I mean, like, okay, it's kind of cheesy, but I mean, that's the truth. And the last thing that's the most important in this new kind of world of, if you want to come on this monthly adventure with me, because I really don't know what this is going to look like, and we're going to kind of define it as we go, I need the commitment that if at any point it doesn't feel right, that you're willing to have that conversation with me. So that's kind of my ask. If you're willing to put $2 down a month, and next month it's like, this just doesn't feel right, I want you to be open and have that conversation with me, because that's much more important than the money, just so we're on the same page. Okay, thank you everyone, really appreciate it.
One of the reasons that I think there's things that are really important, right? It's really knowing the kind of person that you want to be in the world. I think knowing why you're here and what your purpose is also really important, and then the path that you're on. And I think you do all three of those really well, which is why hopefully he'll be here like again and again and again, so that we can follow up.
Yeah, I love that.
So, now you can clap.
Thank you so
Thank you
much for
so
that
much.
novel. It was-
Thanks for a great evening.
Yeah.
That was incredible.
Big hug from us.
Yeah.
Yeah.